Hey everyone, I'm NornQueenAlexis and welcome back to the channel and welcome to my special guest, Sterling. Sterling, why don't you give an introduction of yourself?
Sure. I am one of Alexis's co-workers here at Games U in Gilbert, Arizona, but I'm a historian by trade, focused on military history, and I was in the U.S. Army for 5 years.
So today, I got in a copy of Imperial Armor Volume 1, Imperial Guard and Imperial Navy. Now, when I got this book, I brought it in, and Sterling here went completely nuts on the design of the Leman Russ. So I knew I had to do a video on this. So today, we're tearing apart the Leman Russ, talking about what's good about it, all of its design flaws, which there's a lot, and comparing it to some of the other tanks. This might be an ongoing series, depending on the tanks, and if I can get him to not be a butt.
Wow.
I see how it is. Anyway. Jokes aside, we're going to jump into this. And right off the bat, I think both of us agreed that the Leman Russ is a terrible design, but the Baneblade actually looks compared.
The Baneblade would work if it didn't sink into the ground.
Yeah.
But we'll get to that in a minute.
So, let's dive into this book. The first tank we're going over is the Leman Russ. Alright, just so we're clear on what book we're going over Imperial Armor Volume 1. This is a Forge World novel, kind of?
Source book?
Source book, yeah, that they no longer use for obvious reasons. This book was printed in, I want to say the early 2000s.
Very early 2000s, like 2003?
Yeah. Let's see, 2003, you called it.
Yeah, got it.
So this book goes over the stats of all of the vehicles in Warhammer 40k for the Imperial Guard and Imperial Navy, at least all the ones that existed then, because there's been a few other additions that didn't really make it in yet, except for Imperial Guard. Actually, their last unit was in 2014, aside from all the special characters.
Yeah, and the rest of the Forge World vehicles for them won't come out till Imperial Armor 2.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
So this book has quite a bit in it.
It's quite a lot. It's a decent percentage of what exists is in this one.
Now, we are going to be a little bit muffled. We're playing, apparently. We're doing this in our store at Games U, and so we both have to wear masks. Mm-hmm. I got permission to just do it for the intro, and that was it. We made sure no one was in the store aside from us, and everything was safe. So, there's stats here that I could go over, but I'm not a military expert.
Yeah, so there's a lot of confusion in the civilian world about why did Forge World and Games Workshop and other military style games print things out like this. So technical specifications, stuff like this that you see in the real world, you'll see something similar to this, but it's almost always going to be a training aid, so it's never going to give you any real information. It's all just best guesses that you cobble together for intelligence purposes and stuff like that. But so, let's just get started off, I guess.
Alrighty.
So, remember, this is before Adeptus Mechanicus was even a faction, so they're part of the Departamento Manufactorum in this book. So you got the basic name, Leman Russ Battle Tank. Battle Tank is a classification of tank. It means it is every unit will have several of these in attachment. They're not designed for hunting other tanks. They're not designed to siege cities. They are your workhorses, your bread and butter, which is why a lot of these stats afterwards have problems. There's apparently 33 different types of the standard Leman Russ.
That would be kind of crazy. Well, let's see. There's the Deathcore Krieg one that we know of, and all of the different cannons on top of it. Now, does a different turret change this? What a tank is?
It would, because it wouldn't be the same pattern. So the patterns, normally a pattern means a different production facility. So in the modern world, if you talk about the AK-47, for example, the Kalashnikov rifle, those were made in several different factories. And because they were made in different factories, they all got different pattern numbers. But collectively, everyone just calls them all the AK-47. Same here with the Leman Russ.
That factors in the AK-74 and...
Well, that's a whole different thing, which we can go into some other time if people are interested.
Because I would like to go into that with all the different bolt guns and las guns with you.
Oh, yeah, I gladly would I talk ad nauseum about why the Godwin bolter just upsets me. But yeah, so 33 different types, not surprising because according to the lore, there's different STCs out there. I'm sure there's a pattern for a command vehicle, a pattern for a vehicle with extra storage for armor-piercing rounds or whatever.
I think that would be the Vanquisher.
Yeah, you'd think, right? But we'll get to that in a second, too. Okay, crew. You get a commander, a gunner, a driver, a loader, and 2 sponsoring gunners. This part I'm actually okay with. Like, the commander is the one who's clearly in charge. The gunner would be second in seniority after him. The driver is third, then the loader. And then the 2 sponsoring gunners really have no purpose in a tank other than manning auxiliary weapons.
So that would be the side-mounted guns that would be in here.
Yeah, the side-mounted, like, heavy bolters or plasma cannons, whatever they are. So those guys would essentially just be, they have no real training on how to work a tank, but they know how to shoot a gun, so you just put them in the sponsor.
And is that equivalent to real world?
That is very much equivalent to real world. The Leman Russ, like this whole trapezoid, I believe that's the right shape name. I don't know. Geometry was a long time ago for me. But this shape, they actually stole it from an existing tank, and it's one that a lot of people who've ever seen a World War I movie recognize. It's called a land ship. Now, the land ships had 4 different types, Mark 1 to Mark 4, and they were big and they were slow because they were, extremely underpowered, but they didn't have to be fast because it was World War I. So your enemy has been in the same place for 3 months. You have time to put this thing on a train, take it there, unload it, and then watch it crawl to the front lines.
Now, is that something we do with modern tanks?
Oh yeah, it's one of the funniest things as a service member I get to see is when people lose their mind because they're like, oh, the military is coming to invade Wyoming. And someone posts a picture of a bunch of tanks, a bunch of like armored vehicles on a train. That's just how we move them. Like, tanks aren't fast. And if I had to drive a tank from like Alaska to Seattle, that's like a month-long drive.
Oh, jeez.
Or I could just put it on a boat and be there in a week, So,
or a train in roughly the same thing.
Or throw it out the back of an aircraft.
What?
It is a thing. It's very cool to see happen. We could go into the mechanics of that later, because that's one thing I wish 40K had.
No, they do. The Elysians do that.
The Elysians do it with the Thorax. They don't do it with like a main battle tank. And there are some cool videos out there where you can see an M1 Abrams get chucked out the back of an aircraft that's flying just feet above the ground. It's really cool stuff. I was a paratrooper for most of my career, so I got to jump out of aircraft after we had pushed Humvees out the back on giant steel pallets. And sometimes they landed, sometimes they didn't.
I'm assuming the crew dropped separately.
Yeah, though we drop all the vehicles off in one pass, and then we'd go back around, and then everybody else jumps out on the second try.
Okay.
Yeah. Meanwhile, there's people on the ground running up and trying to move the vehicles off the drop zone. It's a whole production. So
the way that the Imperial Guard actually deploys their vehicles via Valkyrie dropship is...
That's a totally thing. In the real world military, there's a thing called sling loading. If you ever see a vehicle underneath a helicopter, that's a sling load. It pretty much just means that's tied on with some cables and one big tackle box in the middle. Yeah, you can totally drop in a vehicle and then a bunch of troopers as well.
Huh.
And there's a whole realm of strategy that goes into seizing airfields so you can drop stuff off without having to yeet it out the back of a plane in flight because, parachutes don't always work.
So, Imperial Guard military tactic, for that specifically, is a real thing.
It's a real thing, and it could work. You don't see a lot of it happen right now because in, again, the real world, we don't have situations where you want to drop a ton of people at one time. At least we don't here in America. If we went to war with Russia, for example, my unit was very much aware that one day we could be like, hey, we're all hopping on a plane and we're jumping into Irkutsk, which is on the eastern side of Russia. We were ready for that kind of stuff. Did it happen? No, just because it's not super practical for 90% of the things you want to do. But it's totally feasible, especially when you look at Imperial Guard regiments. If they want to assault a planet, first thing you have to do is seize all your drop zones. Like, people question why drop pods would be useful, because you can't shoot out of them and they just bullet into the ground. Yeah, that happens, but a drop pod hits the ground in seconds after it's launched. Whereas a Valkyrie or one of the bigger carry-all vehicles that the Imperial Guard have, or even like the Titan landers, they have to carefully land, relatively careful to a drop pod.
Yeah.
And the longer you're in the air, the longer you give somebody a chance to shoot you. Now, in the real world, that's a war crime, but this is 40K, so war crimes are A-OK.
Yeah, it's okay as long as it's in the name of the Emperor. So
Yeah,
that's
pretty
where
much.
Space Marines would come in, where you would drop Space Marines to secure the landing zones, and then the Imperial Guard would actually do the warfare.
Yeah, but like by and large, that would be how I think a modern military strategist would try and use them, just because they are shock troopers. They are really good at forming and holding beachheads, and it's a very blunt force trauma type of warfare that I feel a Space Marine would excel at.
And again, you don't want to keep a Space Marine in combat too long, because if one of them dies, that's the equivalent of losing a regiment of guardsmen.
Yeah, which we do have individuals in every modern unit that are called Pathfinders. If you jump into a combat zone, you have Pathfinders attached to your unit, and the Pathfinders will set up safe drop zone conditions. They'll monitor the winds to make sure paratroopers don't end up in the trees. And there's a whole extra level of safety that's involved with those guys. But if you told me that I could drop a bunch of like post-human super soldiers onto the battlefield and then just come in on their GPS beacon, like, that'd be so much easier.
So the locator beacons and everything. So it's weird when you actually talk to somebody who's in the military. A lot of the tactics used in 40K make sense and have a real-world equivalent.
Yeah, warfare is a deceptively simple thing. It's the minutia of getting to the battle that's the hard part, and that's something that a lot of war games don't do a good job of showing. And we'll get to that here in a second with probably the worst part about this vehicle, which, like, the power plant, it is whatever it is. We have no idea what kind of fuel it runs off of. We
do know
guesses.
that we know it runs off of promethium, which is also used in their flamethrowers, which is a flammable liquid accelerant, similar to that of gasoline and guzzling of the Mad Max universe. But it does have an equivalent to that. But at the same time, it's also the same thing that's essentially gasoline mixed with napalm, powering their vehicles. And sometimes, if they're not using that as their system, they use plasma generators.
Yeah.
Which, that's more of sci-fi. It works because we say so.
Yeah, this is all McGubbins and whatnot. But what is interesting to know is, like, V12, whenever you see that in relation to like a military engine, that's how many cylinders it has. So like a V6 or a V8 that you have in a muscle car,
Yeah, it's 8 cylinders.
yeah, add 4 more and then you're to a V12. And things like the gas turbine engine in an M1 Abrams tank, that's a V12 engine.
Okay.
But yeah, the problem is this thing weighs 60 tons. Now, that's not the biggest by tank standards. Things like the World War II Maus, MAUS, it was a prototype tank. It weighed something on the order of 180 tons. And
How did that thing drive?
It didn't. It was so heavy it sunk into the ground, the one prototype they made, and it never actually saw combat.
So this thing would just sink.
This thing would be fine on most ground. Any soft ground it's going to have problems with. Like modern day tanks get stuck in the mud all the time.
So you're going to have to send in like Aurochs and auxiliary vehicles along with these things to test the grounds?
Yeah, and the Atlas recovery vehicle, which is also in this book, coincidentally.
Yeah.
But yeah, so like 60 tons, it's not super big. A V12 engine, not super crazy. But then we get down to like the speed and everything. And the speed is where it gets real sad. Its max speed on an open road is 35 kilometers an hour, which is just around 20 miles an hour.
I can run faster than this tank.
Most people can sprint faster than this for a short time, and the fact that it is a quote-unquote main battle tank, it's just anything it wants to support is going to be long dead by the time it arrives. So
that's why you would need the Valkyrie drops.
That's why you need Valkyries, that's why the Aurochs and the Tauros and the Chimera, all those like infantry fighting vehicles that have much higher documented speeds, that's why those are useful. In practicality, I disagree with assault troopers on bikes, like Space Marine bikers, Chaos bikers, even knob bikers.
Yeah, they're ridiculous.
Yeah,
but the only one I see practical is the Orks, because they would take a motorcycle and go, all right, let me go and club my enemy in the face.
Yeah, they would have no problem picking up their motorcycle and using it as a choppa. Like, I'm fairly certain that a knob has done that at some point in canon. But like, guys on motorcycles, they're very fast, but you're on 2 wheels instead of 4. Make one mistake, you're in a lot of trouble. So
even as a Space Marine, you're in a lot of trouble.
Yeah, the physics is still a thing, even if you're a Space Marine. So if you're a Space Marine going 60 miles an hour, and then you're a Space Marine going 60 miles an hour who is now off his motorcycle, like, you're not going to have a great time when you land.
No, you'll probably survive it because you're a Space Marine, but at the same time, that gives your enemies more than enough opportunity to kill you.
Yeah, that should probably be a new t-shirt. I would have survived it if I was a Space Marine.
Yeah, that definitely should.
But yeah, so we skipped over this a little bit, and that's because this is the most infuriating part to me. And it's the size of the vehicle itself. Now, Games Workshop came out a few years later and said, hey, this isn't canon. We adjusted everything. It works now. But there's a problem with it. And the problem is its ground clearance. Yeah, most modern tanks, like, again, we're talking modern day, the M1 Abrams, the Tiger, the Leopard,
Well,
like all these.
Let's
crazy
compare
ones.
it to what it's based off of, even World War I and II.
Yeah,
tanks.
even World War I or II, like the height. One, it doesn't match what it's shown in its photos, because we have this lovely little guardsman here who shows us that the bottom of the tank is almost at his hip.
Which means that it's above 3 foot.
Yeah, it puts it at around 1 meter. And the reason tanks don't want to be super high off the ground is there's weight balance you have to worry about. And also, if there's a ton of space underneath you, stuff can get underneath you. And one of the easiest ways to disable a tank is to get an explosive underneath it, because you never heavily armor your underside unless you're planning on being blown up.
Okay.
Something we learned the hard way in Afghanistan. It's why we switched over from Humvees to the MRAP, the super tall vehicles with the V-shaped hulls.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's when you get blown up and you have a V-shaped hull, you flip. If you're blown up and you have a flat bottom like the Leman Russ does,
You're dead.
you're pretty much dead, because that floor is going to buckle and it's going to kill everyone inside.
So it says it's, where does it say it's ground clearance?
Yeah, 0.45 meter ground clearance.
Which we can see is wrong.
Yeah, that's at least 3 feet given scale and everything, which is way too high. If it's 0.45, I would give them some grace. But the fact that it is shown to be so high off the ground, that's wrong.
Now, let's just assume that the picture is based on limited technology at the time, so
Sure.
they had to make it that for the production of the Leman Russ for the tabletop game.
Yeah.
Which we know that the tabletop game is slightly inaccurate because the Rhino would be much bigger.
Oh yeah, it'd be huge by comparison.
It
to
would
what
be
it
the
is
size
right
of
now.
a Land Raider.
Yeah.
And a Land Raider would be a Baneblade.
Yeah, you can sit inside a Bradley, which is the American infantry fighting vehicle. You can fit 12 guys in there, and they aren't big vehicles. They're actually right about the same length, width, and height that's documented here. But if you're in the back of a Bradley or in the back of a Stryker, you are almost on top of each other. Like, you are touching the person on your left, on your right, and the guy across the seating aisle from you. It is very snug.
Now, that's going to be very awkward for social distancing.
It is impossible.
All right, so we need to make sure that our military abides by social distancing.
You would be stunned to learn how serious a lot of units are taking it, because there's actually, in every military unit on the planet, as far as I'm aware, there's always a doctor attached to them who has the minimum rank of a captain, so he is the equivalent of a company commander.
Okay.
And his whole job is to make sure that the unit is ready for anything, as long as it's, a medical issue. So if you haven't had your teeth looked at by a dentist in like 3 years, the medical officer is going to know about it. He's going to get angry. He's going to yell at your commanding officer. Your commanding officer is going to yell at the first sergeant. First sergeant will yell at your sergeant. Your sergeant will make you do push-ups and then make you go get your teeth cleaned. And this is like a daily occurrence. I don't know how many times I had to yell at somebody because they didn't get a vaccination or something. So Yeah.
All right, so back to this.
Back to this.
The height and the length, is that equivalent to like an actual tank?
The length is fine. The height is where we run into problems. Because like 4 meters, 4.4 meters.
It's 12 foot.
That's 12 feet tall, yeah. Most cars aren't 12 feet tall. Like that is, like standing here in the store, the ceilings in some parts of the store are like just over 12 feet.
So this tank is going to have a hard time coming in here.
It is massive. And land ships, yes, they were large. Not all of them were to that like grandiose scale. But there's a reason why they didn't have guns on the top, those old land ships, and why you saw tanks get shorter and shorter as guns on turrets became more and more popular. If you are 12 feet tall, you're very easy to see.
That's true.
If I'm in a, let's take the Abrams for example, which sits at around 2 meters tall. Abrams has a big old cannon, it's very fast. A Leman Russ stands almost no chance against an Abrams, because the Abrams can hide behind all sorts of low walls. It's much faster. It clocks in at something like 45 miles per hour. So around, I think that's like 75 kilometers per hour is its max speed. Mm-hmm. So almost double the Leman Russ. Can maneuver around it, can hide behind cars that just are in a parking lot somewhere. You know, like we all play on destroyed rubble buildings.
Yeah.
The Leman Russ, we all know, can't hide behind most buildings. It is the size of a small house.
Now, again, if the ordnance of this vehicle were to hit the Abrams would probably die.
You'd be surprised, and that's mainly just because we have no idea what this thing actually fires. Like, the main armament is just listed as battle cannon. Like, we don't get any calibers or anything like that. Like, and if we're going by scale, like, this thing is firing just massive rounds.
Yeah.
And even then, like, basic physics, it's mass plus acceleration, is what eventually, or mass plus velocity equals force. So you end up with this whole situation where it could be a very big round, but relative to other rounds, it's very slow. Most armor-piercing rounds, for example, are light caliber rounds compared to the standard variants, but they have a lot of powder behind them, so they travel very, very quickly.
Okay.
Like the most common anti-material round in the world right now is the 50 caliber BMG. It's a Browning machine gun round. We all know it from so many video games, so many movies.
Yeah, it's the one-click weapon.
Yeah, it's
one-click weapon.
like one. Yeah, you point, shoot, and done. Like the Barrett 50 caliber sniper rifle is like iconic in the military world, but that's a very popular round for like small vehicles. Like you usually use those to shoot at generators and things to turn out the lights in an enemy camp. If this thing was hucking a round that went like as fast as a 50 caliber, no doubt it would just decimate anything. But this is where we get into the problem of it being so damn tall. So this is a fun historical note. When they were making the land ships in World War I, this chassis, which is a little bit bigger than the one that actually came into use, did not have a turret on the top, because when they started looking at how that would work when it fires, because when this thing fires, the top of the tank will move back. The bottom of the tank will move up.
So this thing's going to flip itself over.
And they found out on trench works, it did just that. If they were going to have a big gun on it, and it was climbing up a like slight embankment or a trench, and the big gun fired, it was going to go like ass over tea kettle and flip itself. And kill everyone inside in the process. Which is just super humorous, but they took it seriously, because if you look at some of the older designs of tanks, they'll have these giant skids out the back, and there's a Forge World kit for a Leman Russ that has these.
So they've already factored in the fact that these things flip themselves over when they fire.
And they were just like, you know what, we're not going to mess with that, just no turret will go on any of these like big old things. But of course, Games Workshop, bringing in the grimdark future, they decided to throw one back on.
Okay, so again, for aesthetics, we have seen what the battle cannon round and animation looks like when animated by Dawn of War 2 and Dawn of War 3 and Dawn of War 1. Mm-hmm. I don't know why I said it like that, but I did deal with it.
I think it was in order from like best to worst to second best.
I know, right?
Yeah.
But we did see that even in the game itself, the battle cannon does actually jerk itself completely backwards.
Yep. And most tanks that you'll find, you end up not doing that, because a tank is a vehicle like any other vehicle. It has shocks, it has brakes, it has struts that it has to worry about like ripping apart. And there's this crazy mentality that a lot of people have of like, oh yeah, just throw the biggest gun on there that you can. And we saw that happen in World War II with German tank design and a lovely little tank called the Yad Tiger. It's the hunting tiger.
Okay.
Only about 70 of them were made, 70 to 88, and only 3 exist. There's one at the Armored Museum in Georgia, there's one in the UK, and there's one in Moscow. And these things are massive. Their armament is similar to the Leman Russ. The size is a little bit comparable. The speed is almost dead on. But the problem is the Yad Tiger fired essentially a howitzer, like a big ol' artillery cannon, to kill enemy tanks. But this gun was so big they couldn't put it in a turret, so they had to build it into the body of the tank so that the tank could actually survive firing the weapon.
That is quite hilarious.
Yeah.
So the main battle cannon, if it fired, it would flip itself over. But what about an energy gun on top of it, like the las cannon, the twin las cannon?
Technically, there's no recoil when you're firing like an energy weapon, and if there is, it's minimal. So like something like the Executioner with the big old plasma
Well,
cannon.
plasma does have a mass to it.
It does, but it's not nearly as bad as let me throw a solid steel basketball out the front of this thing at, the speed of sound.
That's fair.
But yeah, like las cannons, there shouldn't be a ton of recoil. I'd imagine it'd be a huge energy drain, and there'd probably be issues with heat dissipation in the tank, because tanks get very hot inside. Like, yes, they are air conditioned. Modern day tanks have AC. British tanks for the last 60 years have had electric tea kettles installed inside them, so you don't have to go outside when you want to make tea. That's not even a joke. I wish it was.
Okay, look, legit, that's the thing.
Yeah, legitimately, you can have your lunch or what was it, afternoon tea inside your tank and never have to open it up.
That's hilarious.
Yeah, and that was the thing that came around in like the 60s and 70s. They started doing that.
Okay.
So you could imagine something like that also being in the Leman Russ, but they do get hot because you are inside a giant heat sink. So I imagine the more things you put on it, the more it's just going to heat up faster and faster and faster.
So is that the reason why, like, the heavy bolter turret, for instance, doesn't actually have the guy behind the gun itself, but the gun is outside the vehicle that is controlled remotely?
So whenever we talk about like a coaxial, which is the technical term for it, so coaxial would be it's on the same axis as the big gun. Mm-hmm. Then there is sponsons, which we know them to be on the sides. When you have like an articulating mount up on top, that's honestly just there because they're like, we just want an extra gun in case of. However, most of the guns, so we see it a lot when people build their tanks. They'll put the heavy bolter or something, or the heavy stubber, like up in front of this little hatch. That's the cupola, by the by, for anyone who's actually interested. The reason that's there is because of the next issue I have with this whole tank assembly, and that's its elevation. So -8 degrees to +22. So that means the big gun can go down 8 degrees, and it can go up 22. Because it is so tall,
There's like 30 feet in front of it that it can't shoot.
yeah, it's like 12 meters out in front of it. I did the math, where a standard human is about, just shy of 2 meters. A Space Marine is 2 meters. So within, like you said, 30 some odd feet, the big gun can't actually angle down far enough to shoot anything. And that's when you would need the pintle-mounted, heavy stubber, or what have you, insert favorite infantry weapon of choice. And all pintle-mounted weapons are almost always going to be an infantry weapon. Mm-hmm. It's why you don't see things like flamethrowers mounted on the tops of tanks.
Unless you're evil and chaos.
Unless you're evil and chaos, and oh, how I wish that was still a thing I could do to all my vehicles. But the reason you do that is if the vehicle goes down, all those mounted small armed vehicles or armed weapons, you can just pop them off their mounts and take them with you.
Which is rather funny that the Leman Russ, and this is just a game mechanics thing that I'm going to complain about, you never see Imperial Guardsmen with heavy stubbers, even though that is the most common weapon that they would have.
Yeah, you see it in the heavy weapons team has an option for it.
No, they have.
They have heavy bolters. That's right. Yeah,
they have heavy bolters and multi-lasers, but they don't have a heavy stubber. Which
Meanwhile, Chaos Cultists do get the heavy stubber.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's atrocious.
It is, but at least it's represented.
It's chaos. They don't get the good things.
Yeah.
But yeah, that is something that's always like bothered me as well. There's just, for some reason, that one fell through the cracks, and I don't know why.
I think it was a design thing, and then once they lost the rights to, the Guard, they had to recon a lot of things that they did.
Oh,
so
yeah,
that'd
be fair.
So once we get the new Guardsmen, which I'm assuming this is based on absolutely nothing, so don't quote me on this.
100% supposition.
I think they're going to be out probably around next year.
Yeah.
I'm going to say mid next year because my guess is going to be they're going to launch the Imperial Guard and the Eldar at the same time. So 2 infantry fighting boxes, together as their verse box, I think would be really good.
Yeah, I could see that being a thing.
Now, granted, that's based on absolutely nothing, and I have no reason to state this other than it would be cool. GW, get on it, please.
The only reason I think it would be really interesting to see that happen is we just got the lovely Catachan model for the Colonel as the store exclusive / help people recover from COVID. Mm-hmm. So in my fantasy world, that means the Catachans will be in full plastic updated kits. I know I'm insane for saying that, but that's my dream.
Hey, we can all dream, right? Like the Elysians coming to Games Workshop instead of Forge World since they've been discontinued.
We can all dream that one day everything will be the way we want it.
I mean, they just released, what are they called? Grav harnesses for the Necromunda gangs.
Yeah, they did.
So they do have that in the studio.
They've been made. I imagine there's a lot of Elysian players who are going to grab a lot of Orlok kits and make conversions.
All right, so let's get back to the tank.
Anyways, back to the thing at hand instead of gushing over what we want in Imperial Guard. All right, so it's got this whole dead zone in front of it. Granted, you have a big old las cannon also in front, but if a las cannon is shooting at something that's the big gun can't hit, it's probably shooting at infantry, and a las cannon, while it will kill somebody dead, it's probably not the best gun.
So we know that this can be switched out for the heavy bolter.
Yeah, the heavy bolter, and depending on what variants you take and whatnot, there's other options as well.
Yep.
But I would always have this as the heavy bolter. A big gun is there to kill big things. Mm-hmm. And that's where we get to the next bit, the 40 rounds of ammunition. In a standard tank, you actually, you would have a standard operating procedure, SOP. For, hey, this is how the tank's laid out. So we have the first aid kit here, we have the tea kettle here, the spare meals underneath the commander, and then because we have all the cross-section books to reference from, we know that this is all excess storage up here, and that all the ammunition's back here next to the engine. Mm-hmm. That's fairly typical. The reason that you see that in a lot of tanks is because engines are filled with fuel, and thus they can catch on fire. Ammunition is filled with explosive compounds, so they have a tendency to go boom. So you keep them in a separate piece of the vehicle away from the rest of the crew, who'd all be 4 of that line. That's because and you see it in the M1 Abrams, and you see it in the modern day Leopard 2. This whole back section in a modern tank is designed to blow up instead of blow inward. So if a round somehow gets through this back section and everything ignites and the whole thing's going to explode, it's designed to let the explosion out one direction and try to save as much of the crew as possible.
Now, personally, I like the 2nd edition rule where you could roll to see if your crew survived.
Oh, yeah, there's nothing funnier than oh, yeah, I'll just randomly shoot at that vehicle. Oh, I hit the driver.
Yep.
Now we have a game. But yeah, it's one of those weird oddities. 40 rounds is actually somewhat reasonable, but my problem again comes down to the whole idea of we have no idea what this is, and because we don't know absolutely everything about what comes out of this gun, 40 rounds could be a lot. It could be like almost nothing.
Yeah. And we do know by the rifling of the barrel that it's big.
Yeah.
Because it's not like...
the bore of the barrel.
Yeah. Oh, it's the bore. Sorry.
Yeah. Rifling is the little grooves inside. Bore is how big across the actual muzzle
now
is.
you see why I didn't want to do this video alone.
I know. It's why I'm helping. But yeah, it's just a question of like, how big is those rounds? Because if you scaled everything down together, like if you figured out how big of a bore this was and you made like a little round to sit next to it, I dare you to fit 40 of those in here and still fit 4 people, plus like everything else to make the thing run. Like most tanks are incredibly cramped to begin with. It's why as tanks got shorter, they got longer to compensate for where everything was like stashed away.
Isn't that the same with submarines?
Kinda. It depends on if you're talking about an American sub or a Russian sub. Russians built out sideways, Americans built longer ones. So that's how we ended up with the Typhoon class, which is...
I build mine as a chicken bacon ranch. I am going to make that terrible joke. That whole thing with the
I like a veggie sub every once in a while.
Veggie subs again.
Yeah. Anyways, focusing. Secondary ammo, unlimited. I'm assuming that's if it's an energy gun.
Cannon.
Yeah. Or 600 rounds. And 600 rounds is nothing. Like 600 rounds is a pitiful amount of ammunition, because when you fire something like a machine gun, you're trained to fire in bursts. And this is because most people don't get it. Guns get hot when you shoot them.
Yep.
If you've never seen it before, like look up like Kalashnikov gunbusters. It's a group of Russians whose entire purpose in life is to take World War II machine guns and shoot them till they melt.
That's honestly awesome.
Now,
what about something like the heavy bolter? Would even that overheat because it is a slight combustion to push out a rocket that then flies off?
Well, here's the cool thing about that. It depends, and that's what you're going to end up with a lot of these answers, is it depends on what the actual stats are for this mythical piece of equipment. We know from like the lore and everything that like, you know, the .95 Godwin round that's like this thick, that's the standard bolt rifle round. Mm-hmm. Heavy bolters just chug out more at a higher rate of fire. So when we're talking about that, that's close to like a 40 millimeter grenade, which we do have a modern day automatic firing grenade launcher. It's called the Mark 19. And it is a belt-fed, air-cooled, reciprocating grenade launcher. It's really weird. You never get to use them in modern day because
it sounds like a war crime.
It's not, but only by the slimmest of margins. But something like that, it doesn't ever overheat. But that's not because of the round, it's because of how fast it's firing. So let's say you do like the standard thing, and I'm just going to like show my hands for a second so everyone can see what you do. So 50 caliber machine gun has 2 handholds on it, and it has a butterfly trigger. So it's something like this is how you'd hold your hand.
Okay.
And you would press down, and you'd say a fun little mnemonic for a 6-second count. So mine was, I'm a pretty princess, because it made me laugh. When you do that, you're going to average a number of rounds, and it's somewhere between 10 and 12, depending on the headspace and timing of your weapon. When you're doing that, though, all you hear is ba 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 ba. If you're shooting with the Mark 19, which has the same trigger mechanism, so it's still like right there, safety is a little toggle switch in the middle, and you click down, it goes chunk, 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 chunk.
Okay.
So there's a huge difference in how many rounds can even be fired out of something like a heavy bolter, for example, if it's more like a grenade launcher or if it's more like a machine gun.
Now, we do, again, I'm going to go to the games, even though it is a game mechanic.
Yep.
And we don't know the actual lore behind it, but it is a game mechanic. And let's go with one of the most accurate, being that of THQ's Space Marines. And yes, it's THQ. Screw you, Sega. I will fight that till the last breath. Mm-hmm. THQ did a damn good job.
It's a phenomenal game.
Yes. I love it, but it is a Gears of War game, essentially.
Oh, 100%.
But that doesn't change the fact that it's fun.
No, I stood out for the midnight release of that game, and it came out the same night that Dead Island did. And I think I was the only person excited about that game in my whole town. And you know what? I still play that game on occasion. I don't know anyone who plays Dead Island.
No, because Dead Island sucks.
Exactly.
But if we go by that, remember when the guardsman had the heavy bolter on the tripod, and the Space Marine grabbed it, and he fired it? It did overheat, but I believe that was a game mechanic for any machine gun because it was your machine gun equivalent. But it did fire slower.
Yeah.
And that was something I noticed. It fires a heck of a lot slower than the Storm Bolter, which was literally, you couldn't aim that. That was the worst weapon in the game to me. Because you couldn't aim the damn thing.
It was horrendous. The Stalker Bolter and Melt-A-Gun, that was your loadout. Like, that's how you had fun.
And the Power Axe.
And the Power Axe and the Jump Pack.
You can dance all pretty in the battlefield.
I'm going to have to play that game again tonight.
Yeah, I'm going to also.
But yeah, no, it's all about rate of fire. Like, that's why, like, big old sniper rifles that have a lot of propellant in the cartridges, they're usually one shot and that's it. The 50 caliber machine gun, it fires a lot of rounds, but you actually have to change the barrel. Like, the barrel manually detaches, comes out, and you can slap a new one in so that one can cool while the other one fires.
Okay, so that's kind of awesome.
Yeah, it's detachable barrels are really handy. They just make the gun live longer. If you grab the wrong barrel, your gun could explode, but that's something that we're slowly phasing out in the modern day. We're getting better at machining. Even Games Workshop is, because you could shoot plasma guns now as much as you want without them overheating. I know, right? It's almost like having a toggle switch is useful or something.
Also, I do want to point this out really quickly, and this has nothing to do with the Leman Russ except for the Leman Russ Executioner. Plasma doesn't overheat unless you switch it to a maximal setting. The maximal setting takes off its safety limiters so that the gun can fire at a much, much stronger blast, but it severely damages the weapon.
But Alexis, I want to shoot a small sun at somebody.
I mean, by all means, we have the Leman Russ Executioner, which I still think should be able to swap this gun out for another plasma cannon.
Oh, that would be so much fun.
Yeah, double plasma on top, 2 plasmas on the side, and then 1 sponson.
Yeah.
And then the guy pops out with his plasma gun.
Now we're getting into silly territory. But anyways, so again, 600 rounds is a weird number.
Especially if it has the 3 guns.
Yeah, which is the whole other thing, is when you have a sponson, like, if you ever get a chance to go to a big armored museum, look them up in your local area, you'd be shocked how many people own old tanks. Because most countries acknowledge that as long as the big battle cannon doesn't function, the tank itself is perfectly legal to own.
Yep.
So you get giant collections of these things, like all over the country. I know the UK, there's a bunch of them. Here in the US, there's one in Las Vegas where you can rent a tank for like 15 minutes and run over a car.
I think we're going to have to do that at some point.
Oh, easily.
Yeah. And I'm going to pop out of the top with a cosplay sword or something, a prop sword.
I think
Drive me closer. I want to hit them with my sword.
It's Vegas. We could probably find you a real saber to like wield. But again, it's just 600 rounds. If that's a machine gun, that's almost nothing.
Yeah, because it's what, like...
standard like box of ammunition, you can get like 100 rounds per box, so that's 6 boxes.
I feel like
in my unit, the standard was every machine gun that was attached to a Humvee had a minimum 3 boxes in the Humvee and 1 already like belt fed into the
that's
M2 on top.
400 rounds on it, just for a suppression weapon.
Yeah, because they're not precision. They're not precision guns. They are very much a keep the enemy's heads down while the infantry do their job.
Oh, and now we know the rate of the explosion thanks to Games Workshop releasing that animation. And we know the explosion of a bolt round is actually not that big.
Yeah, it's just a little tiny pop.
Yeah.
When all things considered, which...
But still, that does kill Necrons because it burrows into them and then explodes their insides.
Yeah, explosions tend to do that to things.
Yeah, who would have guessed?
Yeah, even small ones.
Like, even the shockwave would probably kill something. Well, granted, it wouldn't affect... I know, it
well,
still
even
would
shrapnel and stuff like that, like, you still have to think about that.
Also, that sister had damn good aim.
Yeah, she did.
She also
she
prayed
represented.
the gauze away.
It's
She gets
that.
their freaking helmet chopped off, looks at the thing and is like, I'm gonna kick your butt.
What was that old rule? The Shield of Faith rule that some sisters
Yeah.
units had? Yeah. I play Chaos and Orcs. I hated that rule. All right. Last bit on this version. Like, keep in mind, folks, we're on page 15 of like 300 pages of this stuff. So there's a lot to go through. But there's three stats on here that look right for the armor. And it's the turret, the hull, and the gun mantlet. So a turret, it's the thing that goes on top.
Who would have guessed?
Yeah, who would have guessed? If it's like the Thunderer and there is no gun on top, but it's just built into the extension of the hull, that is called a castment. It's essentially like castle built on top. Is
Okay.
where the word comes from. And that's on guns that like they don't rotate the 360 and everything, but you want more armor on one side. The hull, that would be everything down here, because that's all the hull. And then the gun mantlet, so a mantlet is this little bit that the las cannon's attached to, the actual part that moves with it. Okay, 200 millimeters of armor. That's not wrong. Like, there are tanks that have that. The hull being 150, though, that's where we get into problems.
Yeah, because we don't know where that 150 is.
Yeah, we don't know if that's an average. Is that just this front section? Is it just the side platings?
Is it underneath? Is it on top?
Yeah, and if anybody plays World of Tanks or something like that, they're free right now. So just open them up and click on this little function that's like, oh yeah, armor values. And you'll see that having just these flat armor values doesn't really mean anything. Because yeah, the turret may have 200 millimeters of armor. Is that on the back? Is the top also 200 millimeters of armor?
Is it also on the damn supply box?
Yeah, is it on the thing where we keep the spare T? Like, or is it just this front section? Like, we don't know, so they're kind of useless.
We do know one thing, and it's based on the stats of the actual tabletop game. We know that the front armor is 13, the side is 12, and the back is 10. Now, the back being 10 goes into what you were saying where it was meant to blow out.
Yep.
Okay, so we know that the bulk of the armor is at the front of the vehicle.
Yep.
So let's
Which again
assume
is-
that's the 200?
So yeah, so the 200, okay, so 200's on the front, which this is angled armor, which means that it's meant to be glanced. A basic concept of how do bullets hit things is penetration and angle. If I'm shooting at a piece of angled metal and I'm shooting from the front, I'm going to hit it and I'm probably going to glance off, unless my round is big enough and fast enough to,
Now, is
fix
this
my bad decisions.
is this front design, because this is what's going to be facing most enemies.
Yeah.
Now, granted, it does have this big giant open side, which is perfect for any
Yeah, I'm
round to hit it.
100% shooting the side off this thing. I'm taking a tread out and I'm making this thing useless.
Yep.
Like, that's an easy yes. Also, there's a door I can easily get to where no one can shoot me.
Yep.
You don't think I'm running up without a cutting torch and like throwing a grenade in there? You're dead wrong.
I mean, you can probably run up and just scale this thing while it's driving.
Oh yeah, it's so slow. We've already
Yeah.
established you can sprint faster than it.
You can probably just grab right on here and just jump on top and hit it with a Molotov and kill it.
Yeah, we'll get into that here in a second because there is a cool feature about tanks that I'd love to inform people of that is not secret information, so I can talk about it.
Now,
But
what about the front armor itself? Let's just talk about this front. And
yeah, the crazy thing is the front armor design, other than this massive hole where the driver can see through, it's fine. Like, granted, this one little piece right here, this nice flat section, like
Would be
that's
perfect for-
that's perfect for shooting at, because if I can hit surface dead on, I don't need as big of a round as if I was trying to hit it at an angle. So hitting like any of these slope sections here, the thing's just going to kick up. Now, big old turret immediately at the end of a big sloping piece of armor. If you hit right there, the round can kick up under the turret, kill the commander, kill the gunner. Life gets real bad for the tank crew. Granted, if you're getting shot by something, it's always bad.
yeah,
But the fact that it's got lots of sloping armor is actually it's a piece in its favor. The problem, however, just becomes all that slopes into a weak point, and there is a massive flat section right underneath your secondary gun.
there's also a flat section right here as well, which would take out the treads.
Yeah, and that's a whole issue here when you have, like, clearly these are where the suspension wheels for the tread itself are housed. If you can tell where something is housed on a vehicle, it's
You
a
can
bad
kill it.
vehicle design.
Now, assuming, because they're not fighting, well, they are fighting other humans as well,
Most of the time, yeah.
but, well, that's what this vehicle is meant for.
Yeah.
Mass production and ease of battlefield control.
Yep, super easy, super cheap.
But if this thing were to fight an Eldar vehicle, do you think that it would handle better?
Well, that's where we get into this weird argument of now we're going to start playing with definitions. If something like a Falcon or a Fire Prism rolls up against a Leman Russ, again, like monofilament shuriken blades, that's sci-fi wizardry. Fire Prism fires a massive energy cannon.
Yeah, it's going to blow right through this thing regardless.
Go blow right through this thing. And the big issue that we're missing, like we know how far it can traverse on the turret, we don't know how fast it traverses.
Yep. We do know that it does have the wheel well for turning.
Yeah, we do know that it does, and I think that's on the next page is where that was or something. We found it one day. But so there is a cross section that shows that there is the manually rotating wheel, because you can manually rotate these massive turrets.
Yep. And if we go over the animation for it in the Dawn of War games, we can see that it does rotate slowly. One of my favorite ways of beating a tank like this with base infantry was to just run around it, smack it, run around it, smack it.
Yep. And in the real world, that's how you beat a big tank. It's why speed became so essential for tanks, because if I'm fast, doesn't matter how slow my turret is, I can maneuver my vehicle. So let's say, like, this is my tank, this is my gun's looking this way, the enemy's over there. I can either wait for this thing to slowly come the whole way around to see my enemy, or I can back up and let it fire that
Which
way.
is actually what I do in World of Tanks.
Yep, and it is the correct decision. You can manipulate the entire vehicle usually faster than you can manipulate the gun turret. And that's just good business at that point. Like making it to where you are hard to hit because you're moving, and your enemy is going to get hit.
All right.
So yeah,
So there was a lot of design flaws with this thing.
a lot of issues.
So this thing versus the modern tank is going to win almost every time, right?
Pretty much, just on maneuverability alone. Like, if you dropped a Leman Russ into the middle of a war zone right now, the las cannon is probably going to kill somebody because it is it's an energy weapon. It's insanely accurate. It's going to burn through whatever it hits. And most modern armors are made to be reactive, which means when they're hit with something, they tend to either cavitate or explode. So they either bow inward and then shatter, or they explode outward to diffuse like the incoming force.
Okay.
Like we even like.
But a las cannon would just burn.
Las cannon would just burn right through that. It's a giant plasma cutter at range. There's nothing you can really do with modern
Now,
technology.
funny thing. Then this is me nerding out for a second.
All right.
Ceramite can come through Earth's atmosphere with little to no damage.
Yep.
Which means that it can survive 16,000 degrees.
Yeah, on average.
Okay? That means that this weapon, regardless of its range, is shooting hotter than 16,000 degrees.
Yep, because we see how often it just kills things that
Even
sit in
Marines.
power armor. Yeah.
So we know that it's going through 2 layers of ceramite, and we know, thanks to the Inceptors, that ceramite, if as thin as it is, and we're saying thin because compared to a battleship or a spaceship, it's incredibly
something
thin.
with feet of armor. Yeah.
Yeah. That this thing can punch through them, and then through the next guy next to him, and still kill both of them.
Yep.
So this weapon...
This is the best weapon that this thing has.
Yep. Unlimited ammunition. And again, that actually makes sense to the lore of the las weapons. So las weapons, the reason that they're used more than auto weapons by the Imperial Guard is because, one, they hold more rounds in their magazine. I believe it's called a magazine for theirs. I think it might actually
Charge pack is what they call it. But
yeah.
But it's essentially a magazine. We have a lasgun mock up here at the store that we could like pull out and show one day.
Yep, and I have the long las at my house.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
I love my long las. But it shows that the las pack is usually about this big. If it's an extended mag, it's this big. And if it's the super extended mag. It can be belt fed from the power on the backpack. So we know that this thing has a
Giant
more than
conductor
likely,
and everything back there.
and it more than likely has it right behind the gun because that's where they're mounted.
Yep.
But that being said, that weapon is going to punch through any modern armor easily.
Yeah, there's nothing we can do about it.
Problem is getting that weapon, like the what is it? The one with the las cannon on the top of it. What is that one called? I think that one didn't exist yet.
No, that one didn't exist yet. The one that had the 2 las cannons
Yeah.
sticking off the top. Yeah.
Executioner? No.
Annihilator. Right?
Annihilator,
Yeah.
yep. The Annihilator is probably the best variant of this thing because it does have the shorter barrels. It does bend more, even on the model itself.
Yep.
Also, we could check this based on the model.
We could, yeah.
We could just put a protractor next to it and tell you what its actual stats are.
Because we're not big enough nerds as it is.
And we do have one in the store right now.
We have like 3. Yeah.
So we could go grab one and tell you that this stat is also off.
Yep.
And that it can go down more and up more. But the problem is if you have a las cannon, this thing's going down. You have to angle it so that it doesn't hit the las cannon or any of the front armor right there. So it's only going down here.
There's all of that too.
And it has no aircraft defense system.
Yeah, almost nothing, which that's the reason why you see a lot of like pintle mounted like heavy machine guns, because a 50 caliber machine gun can be used to shoot down an air vehicle.
Slow moving, right?
Not even slow moving. There's actually a fun little like math question that you can ask yourself of like how fast is that guy moving, and it's based off of hand lengths. So if I see a plane coming, I can estimate based off its size and everything, like, okay, how many hand lengths to the left of it or to the right of it do I actually aim? Because you're not aiming at the thing, you're aiming at where it's going to be. And then you just fill that spot with bullets.
So literally what I do in video games where I shoot in front of the thing moving is what we do in the military.
Yep. It's simple physics. Like
It does have one anti-air weapon then.
Technically?
With the heavy stubber.
Yeah.
Assuming a heavy stubber is a 50 cal.
Yeah, assuming a heavy stubber is essentially a Browning, assuming that someone's manning it, yes. But that's why you have Hydras and Manticores. Like,
yeah.
You've got better options for that.
Which I still find funny that the Hydra can actually aim forward, because then you take an AA gun and point it at a person and they're just evaporated.
Yeah, all right. Another historian fact. What do you think the first anti-tank guns were?
Anti-aircraft guns?
They were anti-aircraft guns. They knocked out the little pin that kept them from aiming too far down, so they could aim flat across the ground, and they fired them at tanks.
I'm assuming that destroyed the tank.
Yeah, it was like an 88 millimeter cannon that the Germans were using. Like it could super kill a tank, but same problem as everything else had in those days. You had to have it, and then you had to have it in the right place.
Now, there's another thing that I want to cover in this video, the first video, because essentially all the Leman Russes we could go over, but they're all the same except for the turret that we don't know what it shoots.
Yeah.
And they all pretty much...
We can do best guesses, but that's about it.
They're all pretty much just copy-paste of what the other one is. I think the speeds are slightly different. Yeah, this one goes 35. This one only goes 28. This one goes 35, so 35
and the
seems
rounds
to be the
are
fast.
different too, because the Demolisher can only carry like 25.
Yeah. And this is the Vanquisher, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, because I'm looking through the camera because I'm an idiot. Like, oh, it's really small. I can't read it, and it's right in front of me. But again, it's all pretty much the same aside from...
It even apparently has the same gun as the other one, just battle cannon.
I'm assuming it's a different round that's loaded into it.
It must be.
Would that actually change the vehicle? Like its mark?
No. Ammunition does not care. Like,
Okay.
because again, you can just throw stuff in there. Just because I put a monkey wrench in it doesn't mean it's not still a Leman Russ.
That's fair. Although it does have a different barrel.
Yeah, which is why I don't think it's the same gun.
Okay.
But anyways.
So moving on, we have the designs of all of them and how they camouflage them.
Yep, all the pretty pictures.
Would this be real-world equivalent?
So, just talking about camouflage and stuff, a lot of the Games Workshop camouflages are accurate. This one here, a little less so, just because you have this massive panel that just doesn't fit. But it's the Mortar regiments, so maybe they do it just because they want something that looks fancy. Probably the most realistic one that you'll see the Covenant First Armor, the Black Knights one. This is an actual armor panel that was used by Germany on their boats during World War II, and you actually see a lot of this same pattern replicated out in modern day.
So they took a lot from Germany during World War II, is what I'm hearing.
Germany made a lot of cool looking tanks, so I can't blame them. Like, you can say what you want, but like they had so many designers pumping out so many crazy vehicles, you're gonna end up with some cool looking ones.
Yeah. So they probably took it based on rule of cool versus...
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
100%.
So we do see this. We do see that this door right here goes into here, and that's where the gunner sits.
Yep, that's where the sponson's bolted on and everything.
Yep.
Which,
now, do you think the sponson being there would be better? I see it as worse because this is angled right into a door.
So it's got problems already just because we now know from this photo that these are essentially bolted on after the fact. Which means that there are seams and there are welds on here, which means if a round hits that, it's going to be thinner than the surrounding armor. Also, it could just catch a round and detonate it. It makes sense that it's here as opposed to behind, because you can't get out the front door if the gun's on the back. Which is something we see on the Baneblade model. If you put your sponsons to the rear, they're pointing at the crew doors that are right in front of them. Or the Torox as well, yeah. Like,
but I assume the Torox is because they looked at a real-world vehicle and how many guns it had, and then they tried to replicate that, and they didn't know where to put them, so the designer just put them on the back.
Yeah, I think they got tired of, oh, the gun's on top.
Yeah.
Guns go on top of things because it makes sense.
So then, let's talk about this. How many of these things would be deployed? Now, according to GW, it's an infinite bazillion. But in real world...
In the real world... So the ubiquitous answer of all historians, it depends, because time,
Average.
place, and average and all that. If we're talking about the U.S. military, an average tank company is going to have 10 to 12 vehicles. And that's just talking about actual main battle tanks. That's not support trucks. That's not a refueling truck, which is usually just a massive tanker of gasoline.
So funny thing about that, do you know the only instance of that we actually see played out in any 40K game is by the Orks?
Yep.
Who are the only ones smart enough
the
to
old
go
buggy.
back and forth it's an actual mission. You have to stop them because you're
that
cutting
one.
off a supply chain.
Yeah. Oh, that was from the...
Second Dawn of War Retribution game.
Yeah. That's
Playing
right,
as Imperial Guard, you cut off their supply line. And all of the characters are smart enough, and the Orks are even smart enough to know they're going to be ambushed.
Yeah.
So that's why they have all the Storm Boys and everything checking all the high ground and everything, which I thought was super interesting because I feel like that is something that we would do. We would defend our supply lines.
That is actually something that I've done when I was overseas, is you control the high ground. Everyone likes to make fun of Obi-Wan Kenobi. It's like, don't try it, Anakin. I have the high ground. The high ground is really strong. Regardless of what era you're in, if you can be on the top of a mountain, be on top of a mountain.
Yeah.
It's much easier to hit you if you're not on top of a mountain.
Well, we can even see this in competitive games like the Overwatch League. The second the enemy team gets to the high ground, it's a really tough battle.
Yeah. And naturally, that's just because more of your body is covered if someone is shooting up at you.
Yeah.
So that's basic. But yeah, so
10 tanks, which actually makes sense because
10 to 12.
They have a formation that is the 10 tanks.
Yeah, and a lot of that comes down to you'll have the one commander tank, and yes, like company commanders will actually ride with their company in modern tanks. Then you have they would just be called squadrons as well, so that part is fairly accurate, and they would be in groups of 3 to 4.
Okay.
And almost ubiquitously, you would have one that's kitted out for one job, one that's kitted out for another, and one that's kitted out for a similar role as one of the other two. Because you always have a primary and then redundancy. So if first squadron is your anti-tank squadron.
Yep.
2 of these would be Vanquishers, and then the other one would probably be your standard Leman Russ. But it would be more focused on supporting the other 2 by being more anti-infantry focused, or anti-light vehicle focused.
Okay. And that would be replicated the same in the other squads?
Yeah, and it depends on your company commander's style. I was served under a commander who loved being super high speed. This was when I was in the regular army. And he had one platoon that was all trained on how to jump out of aircraft with snowmobiles.
What?
Well, I was stationed in Alaska. There's lots of snow up there sometimes. So we had a whole platoon that was the, I can't even remember what we called them anymore. I'm sure I can't say it on YouTube now that I think about it more seriously. But their whole thing was they would train same as everybody else. But then randomly they would be told, okay, go pull out the snowmobiles. We're going to throw them out of an airplane today, and then you're going to ride them around and do your normal mission with them.
Now, would that be equivalent to like a bike squad?
Yeah, kinda, except you really just use those to get somewhere and then you get off.
So that is actually how I assumed the bike was used.
Yeah.
In 40K. Like, it's not the rider is just staying on the bike the entire time wielding his sword.
I wish you could just get them to dismount.
Yeah. Well, again, in 2nd edition, when a bike was destroyed, you had the option of getting out of it. Also, in 2nd edition, when a dreadnought was destroyed, you can get out of it. In fact, there's a funny story about a very particular chaplain doing that, the Ultramarine chaplain, who actually did that. He got out of his
He was so
dreadnought.
angry he could not die a second time.
So the next part of the book is a bunch of pictures of the Leman Russ, essentially photoshopped over real-world pictures.
Yeah, this is one of the things I loved about the old Forge World books, and I wish that they kept doing this sort of stuff. Mm-hmm. Like some of them are like, yeah, this one is one of their old tables and everything, because you can see the actual.
Oh yeah, you can actually see a lot of the terrain. Never mind, I apologize about that. It's in later Imperial
It is in
Armors.
later ones. I think some of these though were like early days of like Photoshop, so they did add in all the smoke effects and everything like that to make it look cool.
Yeah.
I know that the lightning strike fighters in the background of that one are all photoshopped in and everything.
Mm-hmm. So we got the descriptions of what they're supposed to be. And again, we see that the Leman Russ is fighting trench warfare, which means that it would flip over.
Yep, would flip over. But because it is so long as it's not firing the big gun, it would actually just get to roll right over all the trenches and everything.
Mm-hmm. Although we do get to see, again, this is the model itself and not the animation of it, how the battle cannon fires. And if this thing doesn't move, all that force is just going to turn this thing over.
Yeah, it's going to tilt it. Like, is it going to flip it if it's on flat ground? Probably not.
No, but it's definitely.
But I'm definitely not
jump it
shooting that thing, like, and not expecting to fire again. Because once you fire that and you come back down, your shocks are going to be stressed. You may bust a shock, as far as we know, and then you can't go anywhere. But you still can't fire that second round because your barrel is going to keep bouncing. And any small change in barrel position changes where the next shot is going to go.
Yep.
And when you're firing, big old rounds that come out of these suckers, that's not something you want to miss with.
I accidentally tapped my camera just as we were talking about that and went back and forth for a little bit.
So everyone who saw that now knows what it's like to be at the end of a barrel.
Funny thing, they actually show this in Dawn of War 2. When the battle cannon shoots, the tank juts backwards, and it takes an awful long time for it to reload.
Yep, reacquiring targets, everyone can hit on the first try. If you know the weapon good enough, you know your distance, you know wind and all that stuff, your first hit is almost always guaranteed. Unless you're trying to do something stupid like shoot someone in the head. In the real world, we don't train people to do that until they are already experienced shooters.
Yep.
You shoot center mass, you shoot something big enough that you're going to put your target down, and that applies to tanks too. Like a tank that gets the first shot can usually win that fight.
Yep.
That's why the las cannon's such a crazy huge advantage for these things, because
Which is funny that the Vanquisher doesn't just have 3 las cannons on it. It's supposed to be anti-armor. Why not just more las cannons?
yeah, just keep throwing las cannons at problems. As we've seen for every edition ever, more las cannons tend to solve big problems.
Now, there is something else I want to point out, and that's the smoke launcher right here. What's the real-world equivalent of the smoke launcher?
A smoke launcher.
Oh, it's an actual thing.
It's an actual thing, and they're actually designed very similar to this. This is one of those things that, you know, art imitates life. What you see here, and if we want to, we can run and grab an actual model and show folks, but everyone has the little smoke launcher bits. It's just like a little paw with 3 canisters on it. And in each of those canisters is 1 smoke grenade. And they all fire together. They're electronically controlled in modern vehicles, so probably still controlled the same way in a Leman Russ. And they'll all just launch forward. They won't go far, but they're not meant to go far. They're meant to only obscure you long enough to get somewhere else, which you see in the game since they only last for like 1 round.
Yeah.
Now in the real world, there's nothing keeping you from firing your main gun, popping smoke, and then retreating to another position, which is the common tactic. Because you know these guns fire such big shockwaves, everyone knows where you are anyways.
In earlier editions, you could use your smoke launcher during your opponent's turn.
Yes.
Which would make a lot of sense because you'd pop the shot.
And you had to declare it before your opponent picked targets too, which was the other big thing. Because yeah, the second that I know I'm going to potentially get shot, yeah, throw all the smoke I can down and then run away.
Yep. So that's accurate.
That's accurate. Where it's placed isn't. You would want to put this thing as high up as you can, probably on the turret itself.
So like, I think that one has it. No, that's just the cupola.
Yeah, that's just the cupola.
Okay, so
they didn't do it at the time.
But you can put it up there.
But you can put it up there, and you probably should, because the way that this is situated, all these rounds are going straight in front of you. But what if somebody's off to my side, or we've turned the turret to engage a target, and I want to drive out of there? Pretty much, if these things fire, I'm blind to my front, which means this amazing secondary gun doesn't get used.
Yep.
If I put these up on the top, and you'll see them on American vehicles, like either on the front or the rear of the vehicle, pointed just off to the side.
So when you get like a few of them, you should have like one on the back, one on the front?
Yeah, you should. Like, ideally...
Or one on the back, one on this?
Yeah, one on the back, one on that, and that's just because these are emergency get-out-jail-free cards.
Okay.
But yeah, other than where it is, it's fine.
All right, I like it. So let's go on to the combat formations. Is this a thing?
Yes, this is 100% a thing. It's a thing at every level of the military. If you are infantry, if you are armored, cavalry, even like air formations where you have wings of fighters flying together, this sort of delegation of power is a thing that you do.
Okay.
So like this first one, like squadron advancing line abreast. So that is, we have stopped at our objective and we're going to all go forward. We don't know where the enemy may be coming from.
So it's covering all angles.
So cover all your angles. Like, so right tank covers everything from the 12 o'clock to the 3. Center tank overlaps the other 2, and then the left tank covers the left flank. Which, yeah, that's what you would do if I have no idea where someone's going to come from.
Okay.
Because then I can always get at least 2 tanks to take on a target that's coming after me.
Well, the other tank turns to engage.
Yeah, and that would be just wheeling everything together.
All right, so this is accurate.
That's fairly accurate, yeah.
What about this one?
That one, considering it is in 40K, that is accurate. If this was in any other situation, you would almost never see tanks do this. If a bunch of tanks have all lined up together and they know where you are, and they're just kind of all like in a firing line,
You're just going to come around them.
You're going to come around them, or you're already screwed. And these tanks don't have to go anywhere, and they're just going to like pound your position until you're dead. Or they're going to call artillery on you and have that kill you.
Which is another thing. Artillery should never actually exist on the tabletop.
It should be a secondary small table off to the side, is my personal opinion.
What was it? In the Apocalypse days of 5th and 6th edition, before the newer Apocalypse, and then before Apocalypse Reloaded, then before 7th edition Apocalypse. By the way, all of those books have the same name, and I hate things that have the same name. Just put a damn number to them.
They had the same cover art for like 5 of them too.
Yes.
It was all the Baneblade.
Yep. But in it, they gave the Basilisk the ability to shoot 30 feet.
Yep.
Now, I get it when you're supposed to represent an actual tabletop. Like, let's say this is the tabletop. It's supposed to be a representation of where that is on a field of battle. And when you have artillery out, it's supposed to be like your base is being compromised.
Yeah.
It's never you advanced with your artillery.
Yeah, no, self-propelled artillery, like, I explained this the other day, but so where we are in Gilbert, Arizona, we are about 11 miles away from Arizona State University's main campus. A decent tank crew could probably fire around about that far. Like, if we're talking about like a self-propelled, purpose-made artillery crew, they could hit something within 11 if they're firing a big enough cannon. And big enough cannons like that have existed. The most 40K thing in the world would be Nazi Germany's railcar cannon.
The Gustav Max.
The Gustav Max, which, like, it was so big and large and it took so long to move and set up, it only ever got to be fired a few times.
Didn't the Americans destroy that? Or was it the French?
The Americans destroyed it, but it was more of a, like, no one really cared. The thing took 2 rail lines to move, and it could only fire at this very limited angle, and it had a massive crew of hundreds to use the damn thing.
We just destroyed it out of sheer S's and G's.
Pretty much.
Okay,
Yeah.
so
But anyways,
this one is.
if this were to happen, and I was like the tank commander, it's just like, oh look, there's all the bad guys. All right, everyone, full stop. We're just going to kill them. This is supreme arrogance on a battlefield.
Okay, so this is we've dominated the battlefield. This is ours.
There
we don't
is
care.
no more fight going on if your tanks are arrayed like this, and nobody's actually watching the extreme peripherals.
So-
especially given how weak your side defenses are in these things.
Yeah. Now this would be more like you stopped in front of the enemy and you're trying to force a surrender.
Yeah, this would be like an intimidation tactic, or in the world of 40K, like you'd set your guys up like this if you were hunting a Titan or something.
Yep.
It's like there's clearly only one enemy we're worried about. We know exactly where it is. Everybody get into a line, be stationary. Which, you know, thankfully they do point out that this is when you are stationary, this is what you do. But if I'm stationary and I'm worried about possibly being flanked...
Especially if it's a Titan, especially a Warhound, since they can run.
Yeah. Like, I would have tanks, like, turned at different angles so that they can all reverse into
You would
safe
have this
positions.
instead.
I'd be much more comfortable with this being just the standard, everybody does this all the time.
But this does happen.
Yeah, it does happen very, very rarely.
Okay.
Like, super, super rare. Especially given, like, modern-day combat, where it is house-to-house fighting in very many instances. If you ever get 3 tanks outside of one building, everyone in that building is going to give up. Mm-hmm. But that almost never happens.
All right, so let's move on to the next formations that they have.
Oh, yeah, columns. Column formations are a thing.
Really?
And, yeah, columns, and even this one, the echelon. Echelon is just a fancy way of saying it's a column, but kind of tilted.
So it's angry. Got it.
It's a little angry. It's a little salty column.
It's a little tilted.
These are like totally what you would do.
And then of course you can mirror this with the other side.
Yeah, and that's what you would intentionally try to do. And then if it's 2 echelons, it's a wedge.
Okay.
If it's only 1, it's an echelon. As far as like where everybody's looking, more or less this would be accurate. When we're talking about columns and everything like that, you would have an alternating left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right. The front tank only worries about the front. Mm-hmm. And the very rear tank would usually have one of their crewmen out on top, scanning everything behind them, just like looking with his eyes, while the gun looks where the gun is supposed to look.
So they would be using, like, in 40K's equivalent, they'd be using their Auspexes.
Auspexes, or just binoculars.
Yeah.
Like, honestly, that's most of what you would have to worry about, because if something is going to get you and you can't see it, having a fancy piece of equipment isn't going to help you.
Fair enough. So these two, completely legit.
Completely legit, and this is actually, like, this right here, for those of you interested in history, this is, like, if you were going to fight tanks, you kill this one first. Because if you can kill the one that's up front, the rest all have to stop. And as we've established, if a tank is stopped dead in its tracks, it's easy to hit.
Fair.
So, yeah.
All right, let's move on to the next page. And then we have the wedge that you were talking about.
Combat wedge. And yeah, and this is something that gets echoed out, and see, it even admits it. Yeah, echelon on the right, echelon on the left, wedge in the middle, and then company or platoon leader or whatever you'd have, whatever command element you have would be in the center.
All right. No, that's...
And yeah, that's 100% accurate. And you could swap this out with individual squads, so squads of infantry, and then actual, like a squad of infantry that moves in a wedge would move like this with, here's my lieutenant, here is our point man, here is, you know, an automatic gunner, here's a grenadier, here is a point man for the left echelon, point man for the right, squad automatic weapon, a sergeant, and another sergeant, more than likely.
Huh. So this is 100% legit?
Yeah, 100% legit. It's a very basic form of combat moving. Now, granted, like, the scale it shows on here is probably wrong.
Yeah.
Because if you are moving, like, vehicles together, these things are probably going to be closer to 200 to 100 meters apart from each other. So, like, we're talking that this formation is going to cover, like, football fields of frontline formation.
So this tank should be able to see this tank?
It should not, probably. In an ideal world, you don't want any of them to be able to, like, just turn and see the rest of the formation, because then that means an enemy on your same line of sight can also see the rest of the formation.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair.
Yeah.
That's my mistake.
No, you're good.
But assuming open battleground.
Assuming open battleground, yeah. In an ideal world, they all see each other as, like, little tiny specks in the distance.
Although, would this move on open battleground?
Yeah, 100%.
Okay.
And it's probably the smart way to do it, because any tank that's going to get shot is going to be this one. And the people inside that tank know that. And depending on your unit, you're either the most experienced crew, or you're the crew that the commander hates the most. I wish that was more of a joke than it is.
Oh, jeez.
But if your tank gets shot, then it gives everyone else time to change where they're positioned, to get online, and to advance on an objective. So pretty much all of this breaks down into someone finally gets shot, and then you're moving in on this.
Okay.
So you're only like this when you're traveling and you're just watching where everything is. But yeah, pretty much.
All right, let's go on to the next page. This is just documents of war and everything.
Yep. Even talks about, like, how long it takes to fix everything, or, like, what needs to be fixed. And it's going to be really tiny for everybody watching at home. But it does talk about serviceable tanks and then short-term repair tanks. And in the U.S. military, it's called something is circle X'd versus X'd. So if something is X'd, it is unsafe for anyone to operate, not using it, like, leave it at home sort of thing. If it is circle X'd, then it's like, technically this isn't safe for people to use and operate. But technically we need it.
Okay, so it's a
So hop in
necessary.
it and you'll be fine. If it's not one of those two things, if it's not deadlined, then it's a serviceable vehicle. Doesn't matter if the heater doesn't work, doesn't matter if, like, you don't have a spare tire in some cases. Like, if you have to get a mission done, it's
This
a
is what you
serviceable
have.
vehicle. Yep.
Okay. Anything else on here that's, like, standouty?
It reads like an AAR, which is an after-action report. People don't keep journals in the military. By and large, we don't. Because we have to write reports constantly about everything that happened. It's all logged. We take the time that something happened. There's standard checks that constantly happen. It's why I tend to not give movie minions crap about being bored. Because you have to remember, like, super secret agent man coming in and infiltrating the lair, this is his first day doing that.
Yeah.
He knows what's happening. That minion's probably been doing guard duty or something for like 3-4 months by this point. Nothing cool has happened. He's thinking about home. So I tend to not give people too much crap if they don't pay attention all the time.
Yeah.
Because it, like a lot of this says, it's like, yeah, nope, this happened. It was super boring. And then the battle happened, and then it wasn't boring. And then it got back to being boring because you just do paperwork. There's nothing worse than like, oh, I fired my weapon. Oh, crap, I fired my weapon. I have to, like, fill all this paperwork out. There's all these forms.
So if you go by the infantry handbook, they actually tell you all the forms and everything.
Yep.
For firing your las weapon.
Yep, that's a legitimate thing.
So, okay, I like that.
Yeah, if you accidentally shot your weapon for some reason,
You're dumb.
you are so dead. Like, everyone's going to be so mad at you.
Oh, so back in the day, there were 14. That was my bad. 14, 12, 10.
Yep,
So I
the
did get
olden
the-
days.
I did get the stuff wrong, and ballistic skill was essentially the easiest way of explaining ballistic skill to people is 7 minus.
Yeah, 7 minus that is what you hit on.
Yeah, so it was always 4 up.
Well, and then this was when weapon skill was, you fought against weapon skill, and there was that whole giant chart,
Yeah.
and vehicles couldn't fight in combat, they just tank shocked over everybody. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, the old days. We don't miss those very often.
Okay, so this talks about the Vanquisher as we go into it. And the Vanquisher has a lot bigger of a cannon.
Look
than
at that barrel.
that looks inefficient.
It could be, or it could actually be more efficient. Barrel length directly correlates to how accurate a weapon is. Because the more chances a round has to spin in a barrel,
The more accurate it is.
the more accurate it is, because spin stabilizes something in flight. If you ever watch Sports Ball or Blood Bowl or something like that,
I love Blood Bowl.
watch a football the next time you see it get thrown, and you'll notice that they all spin. And that's intentional, because if you're spinning the ball as it's thrown, it's going to be a lot more accurate with where it's going to land. It flies more
Okay.
predictably, just because of how it interacts with the air around it. As opposed to just strong arming it and it tumbles end over end, you have no idea where that ball's going to land.
Yeah.
Same applies to big old bullets. If it spins, it's going to be more accurate.
So spin to win.
Spin to win.
All right, so let's look at the Vanquisher, and I think both of these are exactly this. No, this one's faster. So there is a significant difference between the two Vanquishers. That's interesting.
Yeah, I think the whole reason behind it was just where they were built, if I remember right, on these ones. Because this is the Griffon pattern, and this one was because while the art is different, the listed cannons are still the exact same. So again, the old GW inconsistency stuff
Yeah.
happens all the time. But where your tank was built, given the size of a galaxy and the odds that a tech priest cared a little bit more on one planet versus another, it's possible that one was more efficient. Now, if this is actually the giant las cannon version, it makes sense why one would be slower than the other.
This one is this one's the
Vanquisher Battle and Vanquisher Battle Cannon.
So unlimited or 600 rounds, again the same.
Yep.
We don't know what's in that gun.
Yep, we have no idea. All we know is that
We do
the
know that
same
it's a-
Majos fabricator signed off on both of these designs.
That's definitely not copy paste.
It's definitely not copy pasted. He definitely did not stamp all of these things with a rubber stamp cherub. And he definitely wouldn't be super dead already because a few hundred years passed between the two.
Well, it's a fabricator general.
Oh yeah,
It's
that's true.
fabricator.
He's entirely fine.
Yeah, he can live for thousands of years.
He's a lot less organic.
Belisarius' Call is over 10,000 years old. So.
That is true. Yep.
And Greyfax is, what, 6,000? Because she was taken by Trazine in M42.
I try not to think too hard about.
Look, in 40K, essentially, it doesn't matter. Your age is until the plot demands that you die, which GW will never kill a character.
Wah, wah.
I mean, hell, what is it? Yarick is over 200 during his last fight with Gazgul. Now, that's because of Rejuve and everything. Well,
Yeah.
the Indominus Crusade just happened. That's 250 years.
Yep.
So he's still alive at 500 years old.
Yeah, the Rejuve MacGuffin. It's a great thing.
It's why my homebrew character has lived to 400. Anyway, getting back to this. I do know that the Vanquisher Battle Cannon does fire a shell because one comes with the kit.
Yes, and it's kind of weird because it's a round-nosed shell. And the reason why that's weird is, so if I had a better piece of paper to show this on, we'll actually just try this real fast and see if folks can see it at home. So there's two different kinds of shells that you'll normally see get fired. A little bit of definition to help people out at home. So that's a big old bullet, also known as a round. This is the actual projectile. This is the actual casing. Inside of this is all sorts of science. It's essentially just, yeah, there's science in that thing.
Yes, science.
It's science. Some of it's proprietary. A lot of it is just going to come down to it's some sort of propellant. So think gunpowder, and you're very close to what it is. It's not like plastic explosive. There's no gremlins inside that are just kicking the round out, I swear. When these rounds fire, the whole spinning mechanism happens. But this whole thing doesn't leave the barrel.
No, just the front does, doesn't it?
Just the front does. And how the fronts are usually shaped, when we're talking about tank rounds, you all get to see how much of a genius artist I am. Oh yeah, clearly a genius. Man, I am terrible. So the front of the round is this side.
So it's a rounded edge?
Yeah, so usually they're rounded edges. Because all of this inside, remember all the science that kicked the thing out of the case?
There's more science inside?
This is where the bad science lives. This is where you actually have like a composite explosive. So like C4 is one that you get in some rounds. This is where incendiary mechanisms go. So like white phosphorus and things like that. In the 40K universe, they have chemical artillery and whatnot. That would sit in here as like an inert chemical propellant, which would detonate and spread out.
Oh, that's horrible.
Oh, it's horrific. So all that sits inside of a shell. Because you have to fit stuff inside of a high explosive chemical or phosphorus shell, it has to be big, which means it has to have a rounded front. So one thing leads to another, leads to another, leads to another. When you're talking about a armor-piercing round...
Isn't it triangular?
The front is usually triangular, and let's see if I can sketch this one off memory. I feel like I'm fairly close. It's pretty much like a giant thumbtack when you see one out in the wild. And that's
see one out in the wild.
Out in the wild.
In America, we have entire herds of these that wander through the Texas area.
It's horrific. Yeah. Just cattle slaughtered. So this is essentially when you talk about sabot, S-A-B-O-T. It's French for shoe.
Shoe?
It's shoe. It's also where we get the term saboteur. People got mad when there were looms created to help make textiles and cloth. Mm-hmm. So they would take their wooden clogs, their sabots, and they'd throw them into the looms to destroy them. And they'd be known as saboteurs.
The only thing I can think of is Sabaton. And just knowing
Great band.
It is.
They're fantastic. So this would be like a rigid composite shell.
Okay.
And the reason you have it just, like this, is there's a tiny little point of impact.
And that
to go through the
all
armor.
The energy.
Yep, transfers all the energy. As opposed to this one where the impact is over a wide area. Mm-hmm. The reason you want the really small point is also because it will catch on
edge.
Any sort of edge. So like if this thing's going to hit a big old rounded piece of metal, like right here, it's going to come forward and then it's more than likely just going to bounce off if the angle's wrong. These have a much higher chance of digging in and then imparting their energy into the surface, as opposed to just flicking off to the side.
Okay.
And yeah, there's so many different variants of these things. Some are just essentially glorified railroad spikes.
That's hilarious.
With all of this would be the round. Like this itself would be just one giant hunk of like ceramic, steel, tungsten, depleted uranium, and everything else around that, the shoe, the sabot part, is essentially like some of them are plastic, to be perfectly honest. The air will catch these things as soon as it leaves the barrel, kick it away, and because physics is fun, they'll impart the force to the back of the round and make it go even faster. So essentially kicks it out of the front of the barrel. It's really kind of cool to see happen in slow motion. And that's what like an armor-piercing shell would be more like.
And again, it has the explosive inside it?
No, most armor-piercing shells don't. Just because you need the shell to be small in order to get through the armor.
So it's just a chunk of metal you just hurl at the enemy?
Just a chunk of metal. And honestly, that's all you really need. Because it's not the round that kills you. 99% of the time. It's the shrapnel that happens inside.
Yeah.
Because when a round goes through here, all the metal it's displacing has to go somewhere.
And that's into those gushy little gusher people.
And it's going to go as fast as the round that hit it was, minus the force taken off by burrowing through 200 millimeters of metal.
And then on this vehicle, we actually see something else, which is the Hunter-Killer missile. I believe that's the Hunter-Killer missile. I'm assuming
either that or a Spotlight. It could be one or the other, but again, modern military, like, it's entirely possible that that is a missile launcher. We have one called the TOW, T-O-W, and that one essentially fires, anyone who's played Call of Duty, think Javelin. It's just a giant disposable missile tube. But most missiles today, they're actually more of glorified rockets.
Yeah.
Because they have copper wires that fly out behind them that you actually use to steer the rocket/missile into its target. And there's a fine art to it.
Just a guy with a...
Yeah. Oh, yeah. For those who didn't see it, like, this action, that's 100% what happens. There's a screen that your face is glued to. It's really fun. A buddy of mine somehow managed to hit the lone telephone pole in a field of nothing with his on accident, so...
At that point, I would say that was on purpose.
We all thought so too. But yeah, like Hunter-Killer missiles, like that can be any sort of contemporary missile.
Now, in a real world setting, you wouldn't just have one round in it, would you?
Yeah.
Really?
You would. You'd have one round and you'd have spares in the back.
So, if this was...
If this was like a dedicated missile launching system, or it's like a multiple rocket system, an MRS, you'd have like at most 4 is about as big as they get. And even then, you usually just have one. Because if the tank goes down, you can take all the spare ones you haven't used and move them into another vehicle.
Or you can rip that thing off, can't you?
Yeah, they are technically man-portable. It is not fun.
But it is a weapon that you can use.
A weapon you can take. There's a tripod that comes with them. There's an extra battery system that comes with them.
Okay.
It's a giant brick of lithium-ion nickel.
But...
yeah, it's not fun.
If this thing were to be more realistic for the tabletop game, it would be able to shoot every turn, wouldn't it?
It'd be able to shoot like 2 or 3 times, but it won't be able to shoot anytime the big gun fired, just because of how target acquisition works, and you're usually what's called dumb aiming it. So you're pointing it at the thing and then launching it.
Okay.
Or if it's wire controlled, you have to fire it, and then someone has to sit there and steer it the whole time till it's on its target. If you fire that main big gun while someone's steering that thing and he jerks the control stick left or right, the missile's now going to go somewhere else and ruin someone else's day.
Now, interesting little side note about these vehicles. In 40K, they're controlled by a mind impulse unit. The driver is a driver itself. He controls the handles and everything, but it's also plugged into him in some, or her, or them, in some way, shape, or form. And it is partially controlled by their brain itself. Mm-hmm. So just interesting little side note. So you can't just jump into the tank and steal it. You actually have to rip out the mind impulse unit, hotwire the tank, and then take it. Which is why orc vehicles tended to have lower ballistic skill, aside from them being controlled by orcs. Mm-hmm. And cultist vehicles have lower ballistic skill, because they have to rip that out.
Yep, and fun fact, it is very easy to steal a modern military vehicle.
Let's not go into that with all of current...
It's just a button. 90% of the time they're just buttons, but what people don't tell you, the steering wheels are usually locked.
Yeah.
So there's usually a key somewhere to unlock the steering wheel. It's usually in a big old safe with a very angry sergeant watching it. So, you're on your own on that one.
So this thing has an anti-tank rifle, essentially a rifle.
Rifle, yeah.
And then a missile launcher. This thing is
technically
killing...
not a rifle. A rifle means that it has a rifled barrel, yeah. Musket?
Or
It's an
blunderbuss.
energy musket. I actually like the sound of an energy musket.
Actually, that seems like the arc.
The arquebus, yep.
Yeah. So let's go
so
on.
all the anti-tank.
Again, different types of patterning and everything. This one looks like it would stand out quite a... No, black kind of blends in, doesn't it?
No, quite the opposite. So this is why I don't like Raven Guard. There is never a thing like true black camouflage. You just don't do it. Because true solid black doesn't exist in nature.
I do want to point one thing out about the Raven Guard, though.
Yeah.
They use a lot of cameline cloaks, which displaces the color around them and everything and is transparent.
Sure.
They also use a type of armor known as Corvus Armor, named after their Primarch, that has the same technology built into it. So they can go invisible and quiet themselves entirely. In fact, this is mentioned in a Dark Angels novel where they use it as well to sneak up on a guy.
Yep, it's even mentioned how quiet Space Marines can be in a Horse Heresy novel for the Space Wolves.
Yep.
But what I'm saying is, like, I don't agree with their color scheme. It's the solid black.
Yeah, so this tank would stand out.
This tank would stand out because of how the human eye operates. And there's actually been a lot of research. No, this one would be fine. In a snowy biome, this would be perfect.
Okay.
Because, like, when you're hiding a tank, you want it to actually blend in. Like, we saw some urban camouflages earlier, which were these grays, dark blues. Those are great for urban environments. A solid black tank
Is bad for everything?
even in the middle of the night, a solid black tank stands out because it's not the same color as everything around it. It will be a deeper, darker sort of black, which your eye is naturally drawn to.
So this would be more like a parade tank.
Yeah, 100% this would be something that would be like an honorary guard sort of thing. And when you see it, it's a commissar tank as well. So you want it to be seen.
Yeah.
You want everyone to know. It's like, oh, the commissar's there. He may just execute our tank,
Yeah.
you know?
Okay,
But,
that makes sense.
yeah, things
also,
like that.
commissar tanks need to be a thing in 40k again.
Yeah, I can't wait for that to be a thing again.
All right.
But yeah, the rest of them, totally fine. They break up the silhouette all nice and pretty. There's different colors. I don't like the giant red lettering on this one. Like the small numbers and whatnot on these, like that's fairly accurate. And that's, of course, it's Valhallan because that's a Cyrillic letter right in front of it. So you saw that on several Russian tanks during World War II and since then. But yeah, and your camouflage is always going to be based off of your theater of operations, which is one thing I do want to say. So if you know you're going to a snowy biome, you repaint all your vehicles.
So that's actually something that Space Marines do too. Space Marines aren't always just the royal blue color of like Ultramarines or the green color of the Dark Angels or Salamanders. They actually do change their color scheme, and you can see this in earlier editions, but they since stopped it because they want the Space Marine to be an iconic thing, so...
Yeah, plus imagine having to repaint your whole army because there's a new table at the shop.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, if everyone painted true camouflage, some of those tables would be real boring to look at.
Yep.
It's like, oh, I can't see anyone. Ah, perfect.
No, what was it? I've had games where I thought I was completely annihilated, and I had my ghillie suit little Marine sitting in the woods, and I'm just like, there he is.
Oh yeah, I don't know how many times I've lost that like lone sniper sitting in a rooftop somewhere.
Yep.
It's just like, oh, that's right, he's still out here. We have to go back for him.
So again, we have the other type of Vanquisher.
This
one has a much bigger back than the rest.
Oh yeah, because this is the alpha pattern. So this is the one you could get from Forge World that has like the enhanced engine backing on it, which is like it looks real weird, and now it's more weight on top of the vehicle and sticking off of the center of mass. So
which also means it's gonna flip
it's gonna flip more easily if it's on incline, or it's just gonna have a pain trying to get up. Yeah, we see more with the dozers and everything. Like, you do see tanks with dozer blades in the real world. They are almost never actual main battle line tanks. Those will belong to like engineer companies and units, and those will be strictly for, hey, we need to clear this road because...
But it might be dangerous.
Yeah, but it might be dangerous. Like, that would really be the only thing. Probably for pushing other tanks that are destroyed out of the way, you would use something like this. But by and large, is it common? No, it's
rare.
It's super rare. Maybe one vehicle in every company will have one. Okay. And even then, it may not be a full-blown tank. It may be just an armored engineer vehicle. Which, yeah, semantics at that point.
And then we have them in battle and everything.
Look how beautiful it is. Just look at that. It belongs to the best faction, too.
Wait, what? Why is that there?
I don't know, and I don't care, but I love it. However, I remember this page specifically because of the subtitle, which says it's an unidentified Vanquisher. If I could have a Vanquisher in my Renegades and Heretics and not a straight up Predator,
yeah,
like, I would have loved that. That would have been the best thing ever.
I actually disagree with Space Marines having heavy vehicles.
Yeah, I've always liked them better as like either rapid assault or attrition troops. That's why I play Iron Warriors, because I think that plays to the theme real well. But the thing that always gets me, that is a Rhino. with a turret, which makes it not a Vanquisher. This isn't even a Leman Russ.
Yeah, it might have been something that was picked up on an Ork specs.
It's just a Predator. It's just the weirdest thing that they're like, oh yeah, no, it's clearly a Vanquisher.
Oh, and we actually get to see the interior of the tank itself. So I'm going to go ahead and turn this way so everybody can see the inside of this tank.
The lovely little breakdowns of everything.
So I do have to hold this, unfortunately.
Yeah, I gotcha.
But we do see that they're carried sideways instead of up and down like you've told me before. We do see the thing that actually turns the tank itself.
Yep, in case you manually have to crank this whole thing around,
Now,
that's the tiny little wheel you use.
If this track, which we know goes through here and up on top, if this track just turned and went this way, would it be better?
It'd be totally fine. There would be no issues whatsoever.
But this makes it almost impossible to change the tracks.
It's almost impossible to change the track. It also means that the track is exposed for so much of its travel length, which just means it's easier for a stray shot to break a link.
Yeah.
And when one link is broken on a tank tread, the entire tank is dead. Until someone gets out, manually wrangles the tread back into position. And even in modern day ones, these tank treads can weigh upwards of 100 pounds per tread, and they are all linked together. So this is a team effort. There are special tools designed for this kind of stuff. It becomes a point of pride in several tanker units that I've served with on like who can drag these things the furthest. And when they're dragging them, they're dragging like 3 or 4 at a time.
And we see Ogrins with these things.
Yeah, Ogren are wearing them as belts.
Yep. That's how strong an Ogren is compared to, like a Marine might have trouble with these.
Yeah, it's all sorts of ridiculous to have this whole exposed thing. Back when the land ships were first made, it made sense to do that. But
Because can't a 50 cal just break a chain link?
it could if it hits like exactly the right way at the right time. These things are just solid chunks of metal.
So if this thing's coming at you, you happen to have a 50 cal and there's no anti-tank weapons.
There's a good way you could disable it, just because it's so exposed for so much of its travel length. And even then, you just have to damage the areas around it, and potentially it will run off of it, like a bike chain would.
Yep. So we do see that the commander sits right here. A gunner sits up here. We got the driver over here. And then the 2 other gunners sit on the sides of these things that we know of.
Yep, the sponsons, and then the loader in a standard vehicle, he'd be the one manning the secondary gun. Until he is needed to actually like function as a loader for the main weapon. You don't see loader being its own designated position much anymore. They're more of a specialist role. They just help when needed. Because auto-loading is a thing that most modern tanks have.
Including some of the 40K tanks.
Yep, some of the 40K tanks are shown to have auto-loaders, which means your loader is your secondary gunner / backup driver. Still more senior to the driver, because screw the driver. That's an old like habit of mine. Drivers are the worst. But one thing I do want to point out, and again, 2nd edition did this really well. All other editions since have kind of like go by the wayside. On this photo, you can actually see like a small little compact las gun.
Oh yeah, the las carbine.
Yep, las carbine just sawed off at the bottom. Lots of people like to assume that like, oh, the Thompson submachine gun and the Sten grease gun and all these things, those are for like assault troops and stuff like that. No, they were mostly made for crews of vehicles, because these things are cramped. And so you don't have room for an extra like 10-inch long stock at the end of this.
Now, here's a question for you. Assuming these wheels went up and came down, okay? So we changed the tracks and everything, and the tank was cut to about that size. Would it make it better?
It would make it much better, because lower to the ground means less of a chance of something going weird when you fire the gun off. And actually, when you actually cover that up, there's a vehicle that is actually in modern use today that's called a BTR. It's a Russian infantry fighting vehicle. It has like a 20 millimeter to a 40 millimeter autocannon on top of it, so nothing like a big main gun. But it's a sizable cannon. They do have an auxiliary gunner up at the front, and then this would just be filled with infantry instead of extra rounds.
Okay.
And so that is like a good hull design. It's the fact that all of this sits all the way out here, all super exposed.
Yeah.
It's not super structurally sound, and something they don't show you in this cross section
is where the skirt ends.
Where the skirt ends, because like we see all these shocks and everything, and if we flip back to like a standard one,
They're right on the ground.
It's right on the ground. So if this thing digs into the ground at all with its weight, or if it's going any amount of speed and it hits an embankment, the armor's going to catch. It's going to foul up everything. You're going to get dirt and mud and everything into here, like up to the wheels.
And there's no way to clean it.
There's no way to clean it because you'd have to remove the armor to clean it out. And if something jams in there, your tank is stuck. And even then, if nothing jams, you now have all this extra matter rolling around in here.
It's going to slow the tank.
Not even slow the tank, but it creates slippage. So the treads have more potential of skipping a wheel, and if one skips a wheel, they all follow after that.
So it just falls off.
There are some hilarious videos out there of like treads running off of vehicles, and that's something that you're encouraging that kind of behavior out of your vehicle if you like foul up all this mess.
So they would have to pull the skirt up to at least here.
Yeah.
For it to be usable.
For it to just be usable. And honestly, it would just be, hey, let's just shorten down the whole track system and just have it run along the bottom. Then it's a perfectly fine vehicle. Like, I still don't like the doors on the side. Like, you should all have a hatch anyways. Like, a modern vehicle will have like 1 to 2 hatches on the turret itself, up in the cupola. Like, the driver has a hatch out the front that he can get out. The backup driver has a hatch he can use to get out. And that's everyone accounted for.
Mm-hmm.
So why do we have 4 extra doors on 2 sides of the vehicle?
I think it was, I honestly
think it looks cool.
Yeah,
I guess.
It was out of boredom. It's like, we need to add something, door.
Yeah, just throw a door in there. It'll be fine. No one will ever question it.
Right,
those fools.
Let's go ahead and put this back. Zoom out a bit so we can actually see the entirety of the book. And let's move on. I think we're almost done with the Imperial section. So, well, the one tank section.
All sorts of battles and everything like that.
Which this looks accurate.
Yeah, so like battle maps, as a historian, I have to look at a lot of these. Some of the best ones that you ever see have actual little flags identifying each individual unit. When they're just like this, it tells you nothing. Because what I see is, okay, so the red lines are where the counterattack happened. The black lines are where the orcs advanced. But I don't know what happened when.
So this might be like a map sent to a civilian.
Not even. It's just a bad map, to be perfectly honest, because it's almost useless. Because without all the extra context, if you just have this map, you don't know where it is. Like, you have some little, like, annotations, but this is the Imperium. Yeah. How many, like, Akar basins are there in the Imperium? Probably more than one.
On a billion worlds?
Yeah, on a billion worlds. Did the orcs arrive here first? Did the counterattack run into an orc counteroffensive? Like, we just don't know.
Is this a supply run?
Yeah, is this some, like, just random training exercise? Like, we don't have context for it without all this extra stuff. So when it comes from a strictly me as a historian point of view, this map is pretty useless because it doesn't tell you anything other than, ooh, look. It just looks cool.
What about things like this? Emplaced weapons.
Oh, I remember when Forge World came out with those.
They're so cool looking.
They were so cool. I was really sad to find out that they went away, and I love the idea of it. In-place weapons like pillboxes and bunkers, like, they're all actual things. And there's no reason not to take an anti-tank gun and put it behind a giant thing of armor if you know someone has to go past that.
Again, we see...
Yep, staggered. So this would be like you're on a freeway or something. Mainly because, for this reason that I said before, when you're doing the convoy thing, convoys are great for when you have to go down a narrow passage. If you can spread out, you spread out, because it means more people can see more things. If everyone's in a straight line convoy and this tank dies, no one knows what's in front of it. Now, however, if someone takes out the lead tank, this tank is now in the lead. He can see everything that happened in front of him. This guy can see everything that happened off the side. You're more likely to find the thing that killed your buddy, turn, and actually fight it.
And then again, the wedge.
Yeah, fighting in a wedge. Like, a wedge works.
We've already went over that one.
That one's, like, super basic.
And then it goes over to the Vanquisher's stats themselves. 14, 12, 10, again, same as the other.
You remember when...
Oh, there's the Exterminator. That's the one with the 2 autocannons.
Yep. Man, you remember when Leman Russes were 175 points?
Yep.
Well, we did not know we had it so good.
Yeah, they were scary, because you could take like 10 of them in a list.
Yep, you could.
So this is interesting. The main battle cannon, which has the ordnance and blast rolls, so it rerolls the damage table, but it's weaker than the last cannon.
Yep, weaker and worse in every way.
Except it's longer range.
A little bit longer range, which...
And it's a small blast.
Small, yeah. Which was important back in the day.
Yep. And then we go over to the Exterminator, which has the autocannons.
Yep.
And again, I think we're going to see much the same thing, although now this barrel looks like it can turn a lot more.
Yeah, so autocannons...
Again, copy-paste of the 8 and
Yeah,
26.
copy-paste of everything else, despite it totally would have an easier deflection and everything. But autocannon is a fun little definition that a lot of people don't understand.
To call something an autocannon, it means that it can fire one automatically, so it fires one round after another, if you want it to. To be considered a cannon, you actually have to be over a certain shell size. To be a howitzer, you have to be over a certain shell size and can only fire in a certain direction. Mortar, over a certain shell size, and you can only fire above a certain direction.
Check one thing really quickly.
So-
Something caught me. I probably just got this wrong, but let's see. Okay. So is the height copy paste? Yeah, the height is
Yep,
copy
the height's copy pasted. Which, this is what makes this a weird vehicle. Like, does the autocannon make more sense for this? Yes. But an autocannon probably wouldn't go on a main battle tank because the main battle tank, it's still like, it's 5 kilometers an hour faster than the other variants.
Oh, this one is the fastest so
It's
far.
the fastest so far by a whole 2 miles. Like,
Wowzers.
It is, yeah, and that's on an open road and just running for its life. And even then, it still has the clearly superior weapon underneath. Autocannons are great for killing light vehicles. They're good for fighting
Yeah, but
infantry.
you don't need that when you have the damn las cannon.
You really don't, especially when your other options, it's like, oh, we have bigger guns. And this is the Imperium. There are very few situations where I could see an autocannon being superior to just a big gun when you're talking about tanks like this. Though, like, while I can complain about the stats all I want, there's one cool thing I wanted to point out. And this is something that I love that Forge World did. Remember the little container where everything is kept? Mm-hmm. And you see all these rucksacks and bags and everything?
Yep.
That is a 100% accurate thing that you'll see on most like army fighting vehicles these days, is you'll just hang all your crap outside. Because then it's not inside with you, and if the tank is moving, you don't need your sleeping bag. If the tank is moving, you don't need your toothbrush. Like,
So what happens when you are doing an operation overnight?
if you're doing an operation overnight and you're not like going anywhere and setting up a new base, you leave all this stuff at wherever your base is.
Okay. So this vehicle is clearly doing something different.
He is traveling somewhere. Like there's no point to having that on your tank if you're expecting a combat operation, because then one stray round and now you lose your sleeping bag, you lose your spare uniforms.
You lose your teddy bear.
Yeah.
Just gets exploderated.
I knew a guy who we nicknamed him Ogre. He went to Afghanistan with a body pillow. Like, soldiers will put the strangest things in their bags, and they'll keep them with you always. Like, all the tobacco, all the nicotine is in one of these bags. And if that bag goes, the tank will riot. Like, I've seen it happen. If you have members of your family who are in the military, or a loved one who's in the military, and they say, hey, I would like a care package of something, logs of dip, like Grizzly is like the cheap one, so people usually get that. But logs of dip, beef jerky, and just like random amenities, like new toothpaste, like socks that are amazing quality. That's what soldiers really love to get because they're useful and practical.
That's funny.
Yeah, like I can imagine there's like one person in here, probably the driver, who's the most junior guy, was told, hey, pack all your stuff into your bag. All right, here's all the calf, and here's all like the amnisac that we're sneaking in. Here's everything. Put it inside your bag. That way, if something happens to your bag, we know we're all screwed.
Jeez. And just for a 40k, a 40k equivalent of that, in the book Talarn, they actually do have all that stuff outside, and they pull it into the vehicle.
Yep. If you're getting shot, the dip, the cigarettes, they all come inside with you.
Yep. All right, so
Yeah.
let's go ahead and change the page. So we go ahead and see all the different variants of it, and variants, color schemes, and everything.
Yep. Some more like reproductions and everything.
I also thought that this tank, out of all the Leman Russes, is the most useless.
There's one cool detail, and this again, history nerd moment. Whenever you see like a clover, a heart, a club, or a diamond on the side of a tank, historically that means it was an airborne division from World War II. So depending on what part of the unit you were from, I was part of the historical 1st of the 501st Parachute Infantry Regiment, so we had the diamonds on our helmets. So this little icon can tell you more about where this tank is from than anything else. Like all these little numbers that are on the sides of all these roster numbers, that's just a paperwork thing. Like,
But that symbol right there will
that
tell
symbol can tell you, it's like, hey, I'm part of this unit.
you. Same with like that symbol.
Yep, like unit iconography is definitely something that people throw everywhere. In the modern military, you'll see a lot of tankers paint names on the sides of their barrels. That's an actual tradition that they started way back when they were all just artillerymen.
So again, another funny story. In 40k, they actually did that. A commissar came over to it, inspected it, and went, "That is approved,"
Yep.
and walked away.
It's a morale function, and thus it is allowed. So you can get away with stuff written on the side of your barrel that normally would get you in trouble. But because it's a morale thing, most units aren't going to care as long as it's not too offensive.
Yeah.
I've seen tanks with the marking of
Well, let's keep
Mickey
it PG.
Mickey Mouse's clubhouse was one of them. That was probably the best one I ever saw.
That's really funny. 120 points for a Leman Russ.
With front armor 14,
Yeah. You remember the strategy of just putting them all together?
all side by side, so you
Yeah.
could not see the sides. Yeah.
Yep. And then you turn the one around so that you put it like this, so that they were butt to butt, so you
Yep.
couldn't hit the back armor. Old strategies.
The game has improved so much. Oh, the Conqueror.
So yeah,
Is the Conqueror still a thing?
I think so.
I can't think of the last time I saw a Conqueror.
I know nobody uses this thing.
Yeah. Here's the crazy thing. Is Stormbolter as your secondary armament?
Wow, it just flat out says a Stormbolter.
Yeah, just Stormbolter. And again, more like copy-paste madness. Except for it's like it actually switches up. Like, okay, here's like the different rounds. Like these carry almost 50 rounds apiece. 1,000 rounds of ammunition. Which like...
That's for a Stormbolter.
For a
though.
Stormbolter? Sure.
I mean, that's 200. Okay, so a bolter carries on average 24 rounds.
Yep.
And this is factoring in all of the different bolters, including the Godwin Diaz pattern bolter and the human pattern bolters, which are slightly smaller. The only difference between them isn't caliber. A lot of people like to say that there's one bolter that shoots a lower caliber, but that's specific to that bolter.
Yep.
They're usually designed to be bigger just because a bigger person is using it. Also, it doesn't blow your hand off when you use it. It's the same as a grenade launcher.
Yep.
Last I checked, you can fire a grenade launcher continuously and you don't blow your hands up. Unless you're an idiot.
I have seen people take fingers off, but that's because they put their fingers in front of the barrel.
Well, they're idiots.
Yeah.
Human error.
Yeah, human error. Operator error.
So the bolt gun goes from 24 rounds on average. Again, these are just averages based on the 11 different patterns of bolt guns that we have information about. It goes 24, then it goes to 50 for the extended mag, and then there's the drum barrel, which is, again, called the extended mag, which is really stupid. But it's a drum barrel and it carries 100. A Stormbolter has 2 of those drums next to it. So it's 200 rounds that fire incredibly fast. So personally, in a combat scenario, I would take my Lats gun over a Stormbolter.
Yeah, only because it's mounted do I think it'd be okay for this. But even then, it's like, I imagine it's belt fed. If it's not belt fed, This thing is impossible to use.
No, it's double. It's double.
I'm saying just for this, like
Yeah.
to put 1,000 rounds through a storm bolter, like and having to manually swap out those mags inside of a close little confined space under pressure, like no, thank you.
Yeah.
Like belt fed every day.
Now you can belt feed it, and it would go to
Yeah.
1,000 rounds. And the funny thing about that is, how would you then get that weapon off and use it?
You wouldn't. This is the one that's mounted into the hull.
Oh, dang.
Yeah. That's why I'm like, I don't know if that's okay.
I don't think that vehicle's a
As
thing
we've
anymore.
established, you've lost the best weapon you have.
Yeah. So this tank straight up is just garbage.
It's pretty bad. And if I remember right, it was pretty bad in
It
the
shoots a
old rule
large
sets.
blast template now. So it's blast, and
Yeah.
you know it's kind of cool. There's a lot of definition on these tracks for no reason compared to all the others.
Yeah.
You've noticed that,
Yeah,
right?
I've noticed it's steadily getting more and more and more. And we got 3 extra ones this time,
Yeah.
for some reason.
We also get the cooler looking barrel, which I really like.
Yeah, I've always liked these stepped barrels. This is actually something that you started seeing in artillery guns. Mm-hmm. These sections of the barrel will actually like recoil into themselves.
Yeah. I've seen that.
Yeah, which all that means is that it can fire faster, just because the barrel is like
Isn't it also inaccurate compared to the longer barrel ones?
it's a bit more inaccurate, but you're just throwing more rounds down range.
Yeah, 'cause-
because the round technically exits the barrel faster because the barrel's moving down past the round. It's a
Okay.
weird thing. It's not done a lot anymore. Now it's just the whole barrel will reciprocate back as opposed to like a staged
Yeah.
reciprocation. But yeah. And again, look at how tall that thing is compared to the little man up front welding on spikes onto the the dozer blade. Like
Like that's actually going to do something.
it's going to be very scary.
Yeah, I mean, intimidation is an actual thing.
Yep.
And then we get to probably the best one.
Yep.
145 and let me see, 48 inches,
right.
strength 7. So it literally has the stats of an autocannon with a blast template, and it's a small blast template. So this
But
one
it was heavy 1.
yeah, this one's useless.
Yeah.
I hate
it's-
this tank.
Yeah. I was like, I couldn't remember why I didn't like it. Now I do.
So now we move on to the Executioner.
The most sci-fi of the tanks.
Yep, which shoots a plasma cannon. So we got the stats right here. Now I'm assuming this thing's just gonna have
It's
unlimited.
more cutting
Yeah.
and pasting. It's the same speed as the original ones.
So it's pretty slow.
Yeah, very, very slow.
But I think shooting a sun at somebody is worth the slow speed.
Yeah, like, let's be totally clear. If you could give me the ability to launch a little piece of the sun at my enemies, I would gladly take that over almost any other type of weaponry. If for
Because-
nothing else than sheer awe factor.
This thing, and we're going with the real world equivalent. Again, the
Yeah.
las cannon is a technically better weapon.
Yeah.
But this thing hooks a blast template. This is
Yeah.
a large hit. This is going to take down a single building, like probably a building in one shot.
Yeah, when we're talking about like high energy plasmas, there's been research into using them as weapons. The big reason that hasn't gone anywhere is because if we have a ball of plasma and it leaves a barrel, it instantly expands to its maximum volume, which means you instantly die when you fire it.
So the thing that they do in 40K is they shoot it out in a,
It's EM projected cone that like
Yes.
guides it down, which
because they fire that first and then it follows it like a ball of lightning.
Yep, which is like a really cool concept because when it hits and it does do that super expansion, because plasma is energy in an excited state, like it's
It's like me.
it's had way too much caffeine and it's just a bunch of oxygen. But it's going to catch everything on fire, it's going to melt a bunch of stuff, it's going to fuse a bunch of things together. So even if your tank survives getting hit by a giant
Everyone
plasma
inside
ball,
is dead.
yeah, even if like somehow everyone inside survives, your turret is probably fused to the rest of the tank now. Your treads are probably fused
Well,
together in
again,
long
let's-
sticks.
Let's just assume, because we do
So-
have the picture of it actually firing.
Yep.
And we can see that it's in a cone.
Yep.
So we see that the ball is trying to expand here, which is what it would do. And you can see the electromagnetic ring around it, which is keeping it housed. So I think this weapon is if we could do this in real world, this would be an absolutely doomsday level weapon.
It would be devastating. There's just nothing you can do about it.
Like, you would shoot anything and it would go away.
Yeah, this solves a lot of problems that you have with just everything else. And also because, again, it's plasma, there's not a lot of mass being chucked out. So
It's
now
also
having
super fast.
Yeah, now having a super tall like turret makes a lot of sense because now you have better target acquisition.
But again, it does suffer the weaknesses of being a Leman Russ.
Yeah, which, as you can see here, you can see that that turret's almost flat against the hull, and it's still shooting out super high off the ground. Mm-hmm. Granted, I think from radiant heat alone, if you're out here, you probably just died. Like, the
Yes.
popcorn in your rucksack is probably cooking off just from close proximity. But yeah. Oh, I've always liked the Executioner. Like,
I do wish it had a longer barrel, though. Just for aesthetics.
sure, yeah.
Strictly aesthetics.
Ooh, one of those big AdMech barrels.
Yes.
Yeah, that would look really cool. Get on
But-
it, YouTube.
Again, it still has all the massive weaknesses, and I still even think with this thing against an A1 Abrams, if this thing could shoot anywhere near the Abrams is dead.
Yeah, Abrams is super dead.
But if it can't get the actual targeting, and we know these things turn slow, we know that they have a large siding, we know that they can't fight in mud,
Yep.
like there's too many things on this that we could easily take advantage of and kill it before it does damage to us. Also, we could just fly in and bomb it.
Yep, so that is a totally valid option too. Now there is one cool thing on these pictures over here that we haven't yet to see in the book, which were a rule and then they went away, and then they came back and then they went away again, and it's the track guards. Mm-hmm. That's how you protect your treads. Like, that is the simplest way to do it. Throw extra armor on top of it. Solve so many problems. I think, what was it? They only got used against dangerous terrain checks before. And then, again, they went away, and then they came back, and you could use them to try and resist immobilized results, and now they're gone for good. But, again, it's cool that this design was thought of by the time they got to the Executioner.
Yep.
But again, if you just routed the track along this way, you'd solve the whole problem to begin with.
Which all you have to do is get rid of these two doors, and that was literally it.
Yep, pretty
And
much.
it would go right across. Actually, it would go up a little bit.
Yep. Yeah, it would have been fine otherwise.
Yeah, and you can lower the tank's diameter. Diameter? Hull.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. I'm like, wait, what?
It's not a circle.
So let's move on. Gives us all the pictures of everything and plasma cues. Look, see, it lost the black treads. So the one picture just had black treads on all
Just
their
for some
tanks.
reason.
Yeah, that was weird. And again, because it has a smaller barrel, it can actually aim down more than the other barrels.
Yeah, it probably would do just fine. Like, granted, you're still going to, like, on the sides, because the sides are so high up, because of these damn treads, it's going to bump into those first, but it's got a great, like, angular deflection up on the front. Mm-hmm. But yeah.
So, strength 7, AP minus, AP 2, this is powering through power
Terminator
armor
armor.
and Terminators. And it's a heavy blast. This thing did become a large blast for a bit, and then it went back to a normal blast template, and now it's 2 shots.
Yep. And you could overcharge it at one point. Mm-hmm. And then everyone would die because it would vent all the plasma into the rest of the tank, which I feel like is a huge design flaw.
Just a slight bit, but again, you have to switch that to maximal. And
Yeah.
if you're doing that, you've already accepted your
We are
inevitable
going
death.
to die. Yep.
And then here's a tank that's gone. This
Yep.
tank doesn't exist
Completely
anymore.
gone, which is a real shame because this one makes the most sense.
Now, funny thing is, I actually have had one of these tanks back when I had my full guard army that I ordered from Forge World years after it went out of production.
Yeah.
Because I knew its like ident numbers and everything, and they checked the warehouse and they had one, and I'm just like, yay! And then I sold it, and I kind of wish I held on to it to sell it now because it's like $300.
Yeah. It just looks so good.
But this thing is a tank hunter.
Yep, it's a tank hunter, and again, fans of World War II will see that this design is ripped off almost exclusively from the Stug. STUG, the Stug 3, I think, is actually the one that they ripped it off of.
Oh, and this thing could do 50.
Yeah, which is insane. Like 50 kilometers per hour on a tank that, like, it still has everything else.
Yeah.
Like, it is.
It doesn't have a secondary armament.
Doesn't have a secondary armament, and it's 8 tons lighter. But it goes so much faster. for no apparent reason.
Yeah, it really doesn't have a reason for it.
But the height does come down by like a full meter, so it's still about a meter taller than a standard M1 Abrams is today.
It's still better than the others.
Yeah, still better than the others. The action shots that we get with the destroyer, this one is probably my favorite because it's the one that makes the least amount of sense. There's a concept when you are doing an ambush style shooting, which the best way to think about tank destroyers is they are the snipers of the tank world. Their job is to get off one shot, kill an enemy tank, and then get
Run
away.
away.
Yeah, like just not get seen at all. This guy's sticking his barrel out through the front of this ruined facade, which means everyone's going to know where he is, but he can only see out that little window. So the second I see that barrel sticking out, I'm sending an infantry squad around, and they're going to take care of it for me, and then I'll roll in with my tanks afterwards.
Or you just bombard the building.
Or just nuke it from orbit. That solves a lot of problems.
That's something that GW never thinks of in any of their battles. Just bomb it from orbit.
Yeah, just bomb
You
it.
have air superiority guaranteed with spaceships. And usually they solve that problem in certain stories when they remember that they have spaceships and aircrafts by stating that they're fighting other spaceships and aircrafts.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, I'll accept that.
Yeah, just give us the reason. But this whole concept of shooting through a window, so this would be what you call a loophole. But if a tank or anything else was actually going to try and use this thing, the loophole would be looking down like a big long road somewhere, and the tank would be back away from the actual hole and then fire through it from a few meters away.
Okay.
And that way
Now-
you hide everything about yourself.
This one has different elevations at -3 and +12.
That sounds about right. Because now, if we had a cross-section of this, you could probably get to see it. But anti-tank guns, in general, are just bigger versions of other guns.
Aren't they just artillery guns?
Pretty much. They're like all almost universally just massively sized ones. This one, I believe, was a laser variant.
Yeah, because it does
Yeah,
say...
it's a giant laser destroyer.
Yeah.
So this whole thing, like most destroyer class weapons, essentially tank hunting class weapons, they're going to have a massive body to the gun behind it. So now the big reason it can't de-elevate far enough, descend far enough, de-elevate, wow, is
Look,
because
we know the English.
the butt of the weapon is going to click on top of the hull. So that's your hard limit. It's no longer something above is aiming down and goes smack into the treads or something. It's that the back end of the weapon cannot go that far up or that far down. And historically, that's true of most tank hunters. Like the Yad Tiger we referenced at the start of the video in reference of just sheer armor capacity. That thing could barely move its gun at all, and it was easier to just turn the vehicle itself.
Now, in World of Tanks, I actually did 2 types of tanks only, which was snipers and artillery.
Yep.
And I relied on my team for both of them.
Yeah, and that's very accurate. Like, these things are not mainline battle fighters. Like, there is no 360 no scoping in like a tank battle. Like,
I don't know. I played World of Tanks.
I played World of Tanks too, and throwing yourself off a cliff to kill a bigger tank is not a valid strategy in the real world.
I mean, does it work?
Honestly, I don't know. I've never found a record of someone being dumb enough to try. But like when we see these sorts of tanks in the real world, and they do still get produced, like some countries still believe that you need a dedicated anti-tank tank, they'll always be supported by scout vehicles.
Okay.
So if we were to equate this to some of the other tactics and convert it into real world, this guy probably has an infantry platoon in support of him, and a few like Tauros buggies or like a Chimera or two to take the infantry guys around, and they all work together in support of his mission.
Okay.
And this would be the guy who shoots the tank at the front of the enemy tank convoy. Because whatever you want... Nope.
All right, so the next page just goes over patterns and everything. Now, where have tank destroyers been fielded? Like, they're not fielded in urban, are they?
They can be, and often it's just wherever a tank battle is bound to happen. One of the more famous examples of tank battles is a Russian battle against the Germans in 1943, is the Battle of Kursk. It was the largest tank battle that ever happened in history. And so regiments of tanks were sent in. So we're talking hundreds of tanks per regiment and multiple regiments engaging in battle together.
So
And
when we hear Imperial Guard sending hundreds of tanks,
it is possible to happen. Like, modern history has only ever really happened once. Like, tanks are expensive, they're hard to maintain, and as we've seen with all the Leman Russes, they're very, very slow.
yep.
Like, considering the Imperial Guard is supposed to conquer planets and continents, whoop,
Don't mind me just smacking my camera.
Arizona earthquake. Like, moving 20 miles an hour means that you're not fast enough to take over any sort of area.
Well, with them, they have the benefit of Valkyries just picking up their vehicles.
Yeah, the heavy load lift Valkyries would be almost essential, like, to how you would run a campaign, or like bulk landers and things like that. You know, something we don't see much on the tabletop because the tabletops are
Supposed to
microcosms of, you know, here's a conflict that's happening right now,
Yeah.
as opposed to the old battle plan, which is the order of battle, where your troops came on first with your fast attacks, and then your elites showed up,
Yep.
and then the heavy supports arrived. That's more accurate to a meeting engagement of
No,
modern militaries.
See, if 40K could find a way to make a turn last significantly quicker, I would definitely do full engagements like that.
Yeah.
Because that actually, it makes your fast attack have a point.
Yeah, there's a reason to take scout elements. Like, even in the modern day, it's like the reason to take scout elements is because they find the enemy faster. And when you
Yep.
find the enemy, you're able to actually do things with it.
So we do have the, oh no, this is the Tank Hunter, but there is a pillbox here.
There's a pillbox there.
There's
It
actually
is-
several, which I
It is
really like.
about the size of the tank.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
Well, given the dimensions of the tank, like, that's a heavily fortified pillbox. So yeah, that's like not a bad size for one.
Okay.
It, again, all depends, but usually there'd be a retaining wall behind here to catch any bullets that happen to go through the opening, and then there would be a radio station and maybe like a little cot so that guards could rotate off, take naps and things like that. But yeah, you even see like a little armored bridge in the distance.
I like this setup.
Yeah, that's actually a really scary defensive line, because if the tank destroyer sees you, you're pretty much screwed, and the pillboxes can support the tank destroyer by taking on infantry.
Also,
So,
the pillboxes, if they have radios, are contacting the other tanks that
Yep.
are in the field.
letting them know, hey, we're getting overrun, we need support.
Now, the laser destroyer. 72 inches, strength 10, finally a weapon that's better than the las cannon.
Because it's a bigger las cannon.
It's a bigger las cannon. AP2 and ordnance, so it rerolls the damage.
Yep.
Which back in the day, there was 8 levels of the damage chart, depending on the addition. And AP1 and AP2, AP1 would add 2 to the damage table. AP2 would add 1 to the damage table. Ordnance meant you rolled 2 dice to pick
Took the highest, yep.
Took the highest for, in one edition was for penetrating armor, which is the one that it's more known in. In earlier editions, it was for the damage table itself.
Yep.
So yeah, this thing just took the best weapon on the Leman Russ,
Made it a little bit bigger.
and now kills tanks with it.
Yep. And does it very, very well.
Yep. So yeah, then we
Yeah,
have the
there you go.
Thunderer, which again is another tank that isn't in GW anymore.
Yep.
And the Thunderer is much the same.
Snub-nosed Stug.
This one is slower. Weighs less, it's 52 tons. So it's the same weight as the other one.
Yep. It is less armored, actually, on the hull. It's only got 150 millimeters of armor on the hull, as opposed to the 180 we've seen on everything else.
Yeah, so that's pretty interesting. Again, we only know, and just keep in mind, this is based on, again, re-entry temperatures and things of that nature, and knowing the heat of plasma. But now we only know what 3 of these Leman Russes actually fire.
Yep.
And that would be this one, the las cannon, and the executioner.
Yep.
We don't know what the other weapons
Yeah,
do.
we still, like, there's nothing saying other than it's like, oh, it's a demolisher cannon. Okay, what does
Demolisher
that
cannon.
mean? Like, is this I imagine it's a high explosion shell just because of how it worked in the game, but it's if I remember right, these things had abysmally short range, and the blast was huge. And I remember on more than one occasion seeing the blast template scatter back onto these boys.
I
and
remember
doming
one
the tank itself.
I remember one game I played back in 4th edition. A Defiler shot a close target. The scatter came back to the Defiler, hit Abaddon and the Defiler, killing both.
Yep.
It's one of the most iconic moments back in the day.
That sounds about right.
But
yeah.
it looks like it only has 18 rounds, which...
That would have to be a massive round, and once you're at that kind of size, there would have to be a crane apparatus in here to actually load the gun.
Now, we do see the crane apparatus in the recovery vehicle.
In the recovery vehicle, and on the Basilisk. There's also the crane to like load that particular round.
But again, with a weapon this size, you might as well just take an aircraft.
Yeah, you may as well at that point. And we've got better action shots with a little Death Corps of Kriegsmen with plasma rifle.
Now, granted, the Death Corps of Krieg are smaller than your traditional guardsmen.
Yep.
Because Forge World infantry was tiny.
Super tiny. But you can just see how tall these things are compared to them. And even just those doors look almost inaccessible with like no way to actually climb up on the sides. So the doors are functionally useless.
And this guy with a plasma gun can actually kill the tank.
Yep, because, fair and balanced.
Yep. But again, you're shooting a sun at something.
Yep.
It's going to die. Okay, we see all sorts of different patterns, including yellow, which I absolutely hate.
Bright yellow. And I can... Now, granted, this is... you have the galaxy to go with. I'm sure there's yellow sand somewhere.
I mean, there's black sand in Iceland.
Yep, yeah. Volcanoes are a thing. This is like
stupid.
Everything's covered in sulfur, so we painted our tanks yellow. Like, sure, that's fair.
The red sands of Mars, that makes sense.
Yep. I wish that they brought this back only because this one is specifically a Skitarii regiment.
Oh, yeah, look at that.
Yeah.
A Thunderer of Mars Skitarii regiment. That is so cool.
Yep.
And there's the Krieg one, there's the Thunderer of the Catachans, the Talarn, and the Palladius? Neat.
Yep, and then an unknown one with pink. A lot of people think that, pink, that wouldn't work really well in any
pink
environment.
the most camouflaged color?
Yeah, pink actually blends in really well because red is hard for the human eye to see. Green is the most visible color because of how the rods and cones in your eye are set up. So something that is green is more visible than something that is red. So on like a mass white landscape, this pink, and this is coming from experience, like pink actually hides really well in snowy landscapes because your eye starts seeing red in the shadows of snowdrifts. So this would actually hide quite well at like a distance, which for this gun is useless.
Oh, yeah.
But if the destroyer was in this camo pattern on a wide open, like icy world, it'd probably hide really well.
There we go. So let's go on to the next page.
And boom.
So, 24 inches, strength 10, so it's stronger than a las cannon.
Yep.
AP 2, Ordnance 1 blast template. 140 points, so it was worth its points if you can get it into range.
And as long as it didn't scatter back on you, which was a thing if you rolled boxcars on the scatter dice.
Yeah, 12 inches.
Yeah, it would move 12 minus 3 for the ballistic skill.
Yeah, so 9 inches.
Plus 2.5 for the size of the template. So it would clip you if you fired at its minimum range.
Yep. So we're not really going to go over here. We're not going to go over the Bane Blades just yet. That's a separate video.
Oh.
We're going to say that this is a much more efficient vehicle.
Yeah.
But we're also going to do the Chimeras in another video. But I'm trying to find the other Bane, we're going to go over this too.
We have all the ammunition in the back here. I forgot about that.
Where is the recovery vehicle that is also a Leman Russ?
Where are you, Trojan? I know you're here.
Nope, that's not it.
Hydra, Medusas. Man, I love the design of the Medusa.
I love this.
Oh, the totally not from Alien powerlifter?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I do love that they try to make it look useful. They're like, oh yeah, this is what it's designed to do. It's like, shut up.
Oh, I will gladly defend the powerlifter Sentinel any day of the week.
Same. The little tiny... I found out this was real.
Yep. And they didn't even bother changing the name.
Mm-hmm. Oh,
Yep.
here it is. The
Yep,
Atlas Recovery Vehicle. So, we don't have much on it, but actually we have all the same stuff.
Yep.
Its weight is 43 tons, so this one is significantly lighter. Which gives us almost an estimate of how much the ammunition weighs.
Yeah, the ammunition plus the guns and everything.
Yeah. It does have a weapon with the heavy bolter. Let's see. There's 300 rounds for that heavy bolter, so that's quite a bit.
Yep.
And its speed is 34, so it's not the fastest.
Yep, but it can keep up with most of the other Leman Russes.
Yep.
Which is kind of what you would want it for. This would not be a frontline fighting vehicle. You would have these things held
At the
in a
base.
reserve detachment next to like the medics and the mechanics. And then when a vehicle goes down, you'd radio in, give your coordinates, and then this would come out and salvage from the vehicle what it could. Or, if you're
Tow the
lucky,
damn
tow
vehicle.
the whole thing.
Now, there is one thing that I do want to point out about this thing. These things were usually implemented where a Valkyrie could not just go to the vehicle and just lift it up. So this would be like urban environments, below rubble and things like that, where it just
Tree
pulls it out.
canopies and things like that as well. Yep.
Or in an area where there's anti-aircraft fire.
Yeah.
So the Atlas would be called in to go there. But again, it's on the Leman Russ chassis, has all the
It's
same
still
weaknesses.
really big.
And one of the worst things is this thing could get stuck in the mud next to the Leman Russ.
Yep. Well, there's one other problem with this one, and I think this is probably the silliest part about this design. Is all right, we're going to take the entire vehicle, and we're going to have it be a Leman Russ. Okay, good. Sounds good. We're going to put a crane on the back. We're going to put a winch. We're going to put a plow. We're going to put a dozer blade. It's got it all. All right, what are we going to do with its armor? Oh, we're going to take all of the armor off of it.
Oh my god, it has no armor.
It has, just to like put reference for folks, like the whole armor on a standard Leman Russ, as we've seen, like copy pasted throughout the entire book, is 150 millimeters on average. This thing is almost half of that at 80 millimeters.
So where the hell is this tonnage coming from?
Yeah, 43 tons, like it's weird. It's very bizarre for 43 tons to just appear from nowhere. But also, it's got the same basic engine as everything else does, the
So the engine is the
HR-230 V12. But that also means that anything that couldn't get pulled out by its own power probably couldn't get pulled out by this, because this thing weighs less.
Oh my god.
It's got the same engine, so the odds of this actually recovering you, probably not high.
So this thing's recovering like chimeras.
Yeah, this is probably pulling a Chimera, probably just like, oh, we need to like resupply the Thunderer or something with more rounds, wheel this thing out, because the Forge World version of this actually has like a little hatch on top that you can model to have rounds being pulled out of the storage container inside of here. Which
Okay.
that's a cool, fun little detail. But yeah, just the fact that they call it's like, oh, it's an all-round engineer vehicle.
Except that it's not.
Except it doesn't really do anything an engineer vehicle does. Like even in the modern day, like yeah, dozer blades, sure. There's a anti-mine vehicle that the U.S. military uses, where it's essentially a giant drum with chains sticking out
I've
sides.
seen that thing.
Yeah, and you just run it forward and let it
Why
blow stuff
isn't
up.
that in 40k?
I don't know.
Like that's the most metal thing ever, and if in 40k they would definitely use that on infantry.
Oh, 100%. Like I am positive. Like orcs, I'm sure technically have used that.
Yeah, the Death Roller.
The Death Roller, yeah. Now I know what I need to model my Death Roller to look like.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right, and let's see if there's. So we're in agreement that this vehicle is completely useless.
It just doesn't do the things that it needs to do.
So let's see if there's any other Rhino equivalent. I saw a Rhino, sorry. Leman Russ equivalent, and we're going to get to those shells in just a second. Okay.
The nostalgia of seeing all these old profiles.
Army list. I know, right?
Yeah. The
at
old
the-
vultures.
I love the vulture design because of the intake of it.
Yeah, the intake's really cool.
Although if you had to kick out the window, it would go right into the engine, blow up the engine.
You're fine. If you're ejecting from a vulture,
The vulture's dead.
the vulture's dead. You don't have to worry about the engine.
Kind of like an A-10 Warthog. If the A-10 Warthog is finally going down, you're dead.
You'll be fine.
You probably died and the thing will still come back and do a bombing
Yeah,
run.
it probably will.
And it has one wing, it comes back, you're dead, there's no pilot.
Yeah, the thing fires 7,000 rounds of freedom to break itself. Like, it's
Okay,
hilarious.
so
Oh, yeah, here we go. The turret emplacement. So I think this one deserves a little bit of explaining for folks who didn't play in ye old days.
yep.
So the turret emplacements, do we have like a full-blown thing for it too? We do! Oh my lord. Okay, the turret emplacements are really cool because they were essentially, you could take the turret off of any Leman Russ variant and throw it on top of what was essentially a small bunker, and these counted as your troops for
Yep.
tank companies. So you would have 6 of these just all lined up, and I love that they finally admit it's like, hey, everything is variable.
Yeah, finally, right?
It's like, oh yeah, don't worry about it, it's variable. It's 1.3 meters plus the turret. So this thing is tiny. I am 1.3 meters tall almost. Like, and I've jumped out of airplanes professionally for a living, so.
So these
like,
things are very low to the ground, and they can be airdropped in.
Yeah, they could be airdropped in just like the Sentinel batteries could be. There is no maximum speed on or off road.
What? This thing can't...
I know,
Wow.
right? It
Can't move.
Can't do donuts or anything.
It's useless.
But all of this is just utter insanity. But if this was a thing that could exist in the real world, I would love to have a few,
Now-
and any like military.
Do you want to hear something even crazier about them?
Of course.
So there's no crew to them.
Yep.
It's
automated.
it's all automated and all with servitors inside it. And servitors in
Technically
40K
not
don't
crew.
count as
Yeah.
crew, they count as a part of the machine.
They stopped being human a while ago.
Yeah. Well, technically they still have their mind, they're just
That's true.
lobotomized.
I love that there's 2 of them in there, a gunner and a loader.
Yep.
Couldn't even bother to automate the loading system. Thank you, Mechanicus.
Now, there might be a loader that is a replacement for the auto loader.
Oh, maybe, yeah.
And
Gene Forged Cherub.
now the other thing is you can get a plasma cannon
You can
one.
get plasma cannon one. Even just the heavy bolter one is kind of hilarious. Like it just looks weird, but in that is one of the more 40K things you'd ever see.
Or the flamethrowers.
The flamethrowers, the Vanquisher turret,
It's just,
like
which I'm pretty sure would just fly off.
this. Like there's so much nostalgia built into these, just because I remember when these got released and I had never seen them before. And I showed up to an event, and I was playing Dark Eldar at the time. I was going through a very edgy phase.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah, and I showed up with here are my incubi, everyone's in Reapers, and I just see a line of these squat little things, and he just deployed them out, and he's like, okay, I'm gonna start putting the turrets down on all of them. And they're all just the baseline Leman Russ gun, and I was just like, what are those? He's like, oh, these are my troop choices, because Forge World said so. It's like, this is madness.
No, this is Sparta.
No, it was a slaughter.
That is hilarious. But that's the most Imperial Guard thing to do.
It is. It's like, wow, that's
And
just
you
a fort out of the middle of nowhere.
And you see these things on all of their buildings.
Yep.
So, like, sieging a city in 40K is incredibly difficult.
It'd be a nightmare.
It'd be like, okay, we hit out the left wall. Yeah, the right wall has like 8 heavy bolters shooting us.
Yeah, this is all just excess.
Yep.
And I love that. I want to have been a fly on the wall to see the design process for these.
You do know that was just that one guy who's just like, he's like playing with his turret on the table and
Yeah,
stuff, and he's just like, and he puts the top of it.
Yeah, the tank's just broke in half, and he was like, oh, and he just set it down. Wait a second.
Wait a second, big brain moment. But we
Pinky,
do
I have an
see-
idea.
We do see things kind of like this in real world where they drop
Yeah.
artillery.
Yeah, well, a lot of the times when we do that stuff, it's really cool to see happen. It is very rare. But the idea of just, here's a heavily fortified position just dropped out of the sky, is something that we looked into quite a bit in the 80s. Like the idea of let's just drop heavily armored, essentially fighting positions into place before anyone even shows up. And there was it led to this whole design process where we talked about rapid fortifications.
Oh my god, that is terrific.
Yeah, the closest we ever got is now there are semi-trucks that you can have. They shoot spikes out of the back of the truck into the ground, and then as the truck drives away, it's just barbed wire flows out of the truck.
Okay, that's kind of cool.
It's very cool. It's very therapeutic to watch happen too. It's like the world's biggest like danger slinky.
All right, and what else do we have? We
Yeah.
have the sentry guns, which that makes sense for the most part for 40k.
Yeah.
Again, another quick thing that they can drop, which have multi-lasers, las cannons, which again is an anti-tank weapon that you can barely see because these things are tiny.
Yeah.
Oh, these things are...
They're-
Where's the...
So the height, 1.6 meters.
Yeah, these things are tiny.
Yeah. And of course, Metallica Tarantula being
Yep.
their name, they are the next Metallica album.
So,
So yeah.
now we're just going to go over the
Lots of fun
munitions, and that's going to wrap up for this video. And then next video, we'll go over the other tanks in 40k. So we just saw this, and we both just nerded out about
Yep.
it.
Just could not stop ourselves. We do not apologize.
So the last thing we're going to cover is the munitions. And yeah, there's a lot here. Mostly we're just looking at the Leman Russ variants to see if we can figure out what the hell this thing is shooting.
Yeah. And the crazy thing is, a lot of these are fairly accurate for what you'd expect to see in a shell. There is one issue that I have with some of them, and it's these little divots. So whenever you see a shell or a round that has a divot, it means that there's way more propellant than the round normally needs. Take like a 9mm bullet, for example, which we could if you wanted to.
No.
So most bullets are going to be straight, similar to this one here. And this is the Conqueror anti-tank shell. So
Yep.
worst of the Leman Russes has the most reasonable round.
That makes sense for 40k.
It really does. When you neck down a cartridge, when these things fire, the casing is going to expand to fill the rest of the barrel. That's why when you fire a large round, all the gas and propellant doesn't just go everywhere. And the round is able to exit the way it's supposed to, because this helps make an airtight seal. When it's necked down like this, you're essentially taking the normal operating procedure for the round and saying, no, I want to go faster.
Okay, and
So,
that's
yeah.
a high explosive shell. That shell should be this one
It
versus
should be,
the anti-tank shell,
it
which should...
could be. The big issue, so essentially all this is saying is like, the bore on the Leman Russes, they're actually firing larger caliber rounds than we initially would have thought, because the breach on these things would be massive. The breach is where the round sits before it's fired. Mm-hmm. So if we're looking at like a standard tank, everything south of the pencil is inside what's called the battery. Everything forward is going to be actually in the barrel of the weapon itself. And so when it all fires, these separate, this gets, I assume, kicked out somewhere outside of the vehicle.
There
Because
is no way for it to.
a lot of them have a lot of weapons will have a little extractor. So it's a tiny little piece of metal, like no bigger than my thumb. And all it does is it sits there. And it waits for the round to be fired. And then as the round is drawn back out of battery, it grabs it and kicks it down. You can break an arm or a leg taking a giant casing to them after it's been ejected, because they're going fast.
So let's take a look at the cannons themselves really quickly.
Yeah. This is all going to happen inside the turret.
Okay, so there's a chance that it just comes protruding out of the turret?
Oh, no. The round's gone. The casing is in the tank still. It's just somewhere in there. So if we went all the way back to that cross-section, which was somewhere
It's
near
after
here.
the Leman Russes.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we'll find it some other day. Or go back, rewind, and find it yourself.
Now I'm curious. Sorry.
No, you're good. I could have sworn it was before.
I think it was right after.
Place your bets now.
You know what? We're probably not going to find it. It's after the Vanquisher.
There we go.
So we need to find
Right.
the Vanquisher.
Oh, almost there. Keep going.
So there's the Vanquisher.
Oh, yep, keep going. It's on the other side of the riverbed. Yep, because it was
There it is.
There we go. So, keeping in mind that, the
front of the round is sitting right about here. Everything
right
back
here, actually.
Yep.
So that's where the round is going.
Yep, and so once it's fired, that case is going to come back. This is the breech right here. So the breech just means the farthest back part of the cannon. That round is either going to come out automatically at speed, or someone is going to have to manually open this breech, pull it out, and then store it somewhere down here. It's just a big logistical mess.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, meanwhile, so here's something
And
that...
here's the commander of the tank who's just going to get belted in the face with this thing.
Yeah, hopefully he'd be offset, like one would hope. But again, this is 40k. Maybe the commander does die on the first round, leaving the barrel.
They put the commissar there.
Yeah, but here's a cool little fact that I didn't realize we didn't talk about. Everyone assumes that these big guns have triggers. They do, but it's a giant foot pedal.
Really?
Yep, they're almost all fired by your feet. And that's a safety precaution because it takes so much more effort to point your toe down than it does to twitch a finger or to depress your thumb, that there's almost never been like accidental firing of these things. If you have like restless leg syndrome, you don't get to be a gunner on a tank. Yeah, that's a legitimate thing in the US Army. If they find out you have that, you will never become a gunner.
Oh.
Because what if your leg just starts ticking off and it starts firing rounds? It's a bad day for everyone involved.
Now, again, on here, we can actually see the different rounds that are in it.
Yep.
And there's 6 rounds in this, right here in this picture, and they're probably just lined up.
8, actually, because we got 2 more stacked vertically on the sides there.
Which they all should be stacked vertically, but that's a whole different story.
That's storage. I'm not going to fight the commissariat on that one. I'm sure there's a regulation about it somewhere. Yeah, and what's really cool is they do break down kind of everything about these, like from the ballistic cap, which is essentially the very front part, the part that's going to pierce the armor. Because it's not all one giant contiguous piece of metal. They're going to be like staged portions. Because
So it's like a rocket.
kind of like a rocket, except just no fuel on the inside. But there are going to be parts that you can like screw on and screw off.
It's a rocket assisted.
Oh yeah, for the Bane blades?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what all those fins and everything are for. So always remind your opponent that the Bane blade shoots rockets.
It's not a Bane Blade cannon, it's a Bane Blade rocket launcher.
It's just so ridiculous.
The Bane Blade is ridiculous. We're going to get to that in the Bane Blade video, which I'm excited about.
Yeah, those things are just insane. So like it breaks down everything from the shell casings, propellants, tracers. Like, yes, tanks can have tracers. Do they? Not very often, mainly because the impact of a tank round is so massive you can tell where it went.
Yeah.
Tracers are more for tracing bullet paths to a specific thing. Do some tanks carry tracers? Yes, but they'll almost always be command vehicles. And the same is true of standard soldiers. Not every infantryman has a magazine full of tracer rounds, but if you're a squad leader or a platoon leader, then yeah, you'd have like a magazine full of tracer rounds to fire at a target that you want everyone else to shoot at. Because that's the easiest form of communication, is to just point. And tracers are just pointing from a distance.
That's fair. It's like a laser pointer.
Yep, especially if you just hold down the trigger.
I was trying to read here to see if we get any type of
Like
size,
caliber size or anything? No?
You know, actually useful information.
Nothing?
No.
Well, here's the crazy thing. Like, here are a bunch of autocannon rounds down here, like these tiny little things here. So autocannons are going to be anywhere from 20 to 40 millimeters for their caliber. So, not sponsored, but like a Dunkin' Donuts cup, the bottom part, that's about 40 millimeters. Like your standard bases for Terminators, that's about 40 millimeters. So that's the bottom of the round. That is this. So you can imagine just how massive some of these are. Like, we're talking 155 to 200 millimeters.
Does that kind of stuff exist today?
Yeah, it's our like mainline cannons are 155 millimeter howitzers in the U.S. military.
Okay.
Like, they exist. They're big. They're real silly.
I love them.
Yeah, you just it is 40K. Everything is turned up to 11 and left at 11.
So we have the Infernus shell.
Yep.
Which I would love to read more about all of these different shells and what they do. A smoke shell?
Yep, smoke, like, because remember, the smoke launchers for your defense, they happen just right next to you. This would be, I want smoke over there. Like, you would normally fire smoke in front of an anti-tank position that you are aware of. That way you can actually maneuver safely, get out of its range. The Infernus ones, those are essentially white phosphorus rounds.
I wish they would bring back phosphorus grenades.
Yeah. I mean, 30K has some interesting moments. Almost
So
all
does
of them
Sisters from
involve
3rd edition.
phosphorus, yeah. Yeah,
And I
white
love
phosphorus is legitimately nasty. Like, it is not something that's used lightly. The US military does still use it. A lot of countries disagree with this. I personally disagree with it. Because it's not only does it burn, but it's also toxic.
Oh, lovely.
So not just the smoke you breathe, but if it gets on you and it leaches into your system, you'll die of toxic shock from the poisoning that happens when the phosphorus mixes with your blood.
Awesome.
So it is horrific stuff. It is not fun for anyone involved. But that's what's in that thing. And the reason you see this whole sort of staged look to it, each one of those ring segments is probably a different setting for a fuse. So you could probably click those over, especially this front one. Click it to a certain setting to have it detonate on impact at a certain altitude, after a certain flight time, after a certain distance traveled. Like, there's all sorts of crazy fuses that exist in the modern day. So I can only imagine
all of the ridiculous ones that would exist then.
yeah, there's probably a servitor brain inside there that just thinks now and detonates itself.
So now that we've seen all of these, and we have a basic understanding of them,
Yep. Oh, and here's your individual breakdowns. How close was I to being right? Yeah, pretty close. So yeah, like, I wish we had known about these before I embarrassed myself. But as you can see, like, they've got like
that's fun.
Yeah, it's always fun. So yeah, there's like stages to the metallurgy inside. There's a whole like complex system of fuses and explosives.
and this is all comparable to real world.
Yeah, these could be ripped out of like any manual that exists. Like, here is our fun little push pin shaped anti-tank round with like the solid core inside, which that would be like your depleted uranium core, and everything else is just steel covering. Demolisher shell, like, yeah, it's just a big old shell. If they only gave us a millimeter, we could scale all these off, but I'm not seeing them anywhere.
We can also tell their weight too.
Yeah, we could figure out a lot of things from that. But yeah, like, even if you see over here, like the incendiary round that the Leman Russ fires, apparently the Mark 7G4.
The cool thing about this was a rules section for back in the day. So all of your vehicles had these. So if you had this book back in 4th edition, 5th edition.
Yep, you could load them up, customize with everything.
Yep.
Yep, and swap through them, which, again, that's
Makes
a fairly
sense.
real world thing. Like, you load out for the mission that you're going to do.
And there's a smoke shell.
Yeah, incendiary
rules.
round, smoke shell. And again, like, you just see it's like, oh, so there's ballistic cap, the warhead itself for the penetration portion of it, remote tubes, so remote tubes would actually be a thing that you see in some types of munitions. It's essentially a little spacer that you can either put control mechanisms inside, or it acts as a crush zone. So it's an area that's meant to have everything else crush into it.
Okay.
So that rather than the entire shell just being destroyed upon impact, it actually just essentially breaks the front part and the rest of it survives. And that's good for like these smoke casters, which you want to be able to disperse in a very specific way over a very specific area.
Okay.
So yeah.
Also, orcs couldn't take these.
Yeah, that's right. You could throw them into the random cannons.
Also, Space Marine Vindicators and Chaos Defilers, looted orc vehicles can also use these rules, but orcs cannot take specialist or rare shells. Very keen orc players might want to consider replacing battle cannons on looted vehicles with their own cannons.
Yep.
That's funny.
Oh,
'Cause back in the day, you had the looted vehicles where you could either have the looted gun or the actual gun itself on it.
oh yeah. Look, Infernus shells. It's phosphorine, incendiary, and thermite shells. So yep, it's white phosphorus.
That's
Oxy
nasty.
phosphor gel, white phosphorus, or thermite.
That's nasty.
Yeah, that is not fun.
All right, so let's see if this continues. And the next part, it does. These are rare shells. And then it tells us the the ammunition in it, because back in the day you had to keep track of that.
Yep. Was it high explosive or anti-tank? Because you had to declare which one you were shooting.
Yep.
Yep. And then measure range, and then fire your gun.
Which was so good. So we have another shell here, which this one is the Conqueror's Round, which has an impact detonator. So this one explodes on impact.
Yep.
Okay.
I want to point out the very last sentence in its description. It was not regarded as a success, and few shells were produced now. Much like the Conqueror itself.
Yeah. So that is everything for the standard Leman Russ
In one book.
in this one book.
Yeah.
Holy cow.
Yeah, never say that GW and Forge World don't put out extra crazy rules, because once upon a time
There were so many of them.
it was nothing but crazy rules.
Yep. Oops, sorry.
Oop.
Smack the camera again because I am a genius. So all in all, the Baneblade, not the Baneblade, the Leman Russ. I saw the Baneblade. I am excited about doing the Baneblade at some point in the
That
future.
one will be great. But
What do you think about it? If that tank was, if you had to face that tank today, do you think you could beat it?
I think most infantry squads are well equipped to defeat tanks right now, just as they are. Every infantry squad carries around somebody with an anti-tank weapon, and when you get advanced training, you learn that the easiest way to defeat a tank is honestly the simplest tool that Russians have ever made, the Molotov cocktail.
And now explain that one.
So when we looked at all the tanks, everyone should have noticed that I was gushing over how the back ends of a lot of the tanks were designed, because this is fairly accurate, because that's where you have to put everything. Like, it makes sense for the engine to be in the back, because you have to balance the heavy engine with the heavy front armor. It makes sense to store the ammunition in the back. This also means most of your venting and everything is also in the back. And in order to defeat most tanks, and this is something that was found out when tanks became popular in World War I and then later in World War II, we saw it again in the Korean War. It was used against American vehicles in Vietnam and then Iraq and Afghanistan. If you can get something over the vents, over the heat exchangers, the things that keep the engine from overheating, that keep the oxygen flowing into the vehicle, and that thing happens to be, fire, the tank is going to stop working probably sooner than the actual crew itself was. And then there's actual drills and training we go through for breaking into a tank, which this giant space between the ground and the bottom of the tank, I would put all sorts of explosives under there and then walk away and detonate the thing. It's much simpler than trying to open a hatch and then fight 4 guys who are all pointing their carbines out the top.
So do you think this tank would be easier to take down than an Abrams?
Definitely. The Abrams is just so fast. It is very, very quick. It has lots of cool high-tech systems in it. But the biggest part is it's just very quick. If you are fast on the battlefield, you are that much harder to hit. Yeah, fast, small, and you carry a big gun.
Yep.
You don't have to be a glass hammer or to be good in anything. And the Abrams, it's double the speed of these things, has the same armor in the parts that matter. From the size, we can guess it's a 155, so it's about the same cannon. I think an Abrams or a Leopard could beat a Leman Russ, and I'd be willing to stake a claim on that.
Now, granted, there is the las cannon, which is an instantaneous laser weapon that can kill it instantly.
Yeah. All I can say and hope is that
they miss.
The average guardsman misses 50% of the time almost. So that's if you missed 50% of the time in any modern military, you would not be allowed anywhere near a weapon. You would qualify once a year, and then they would send you back home.
Oh my god, that's good. That's good. But assuming the las cannon missed, you could kill this tank.
Yeah, I'm pretty confident of that.
Now, even regiment versus regiment, 100 tanks versus 100 tanks, how many do you think you would lose? About 50% of them?
Oh, yeah, probably anywhere from 30 to 50%, I'd say would be gracious, just because eventually those las cannons will start hitting, and once the las cannons start hitting, Like, it's sci-fi technology. Modern technology just can't touch it.
Yep. So, again, attrition warfare. The Imperium will win, but one-on-one, Imperium loses quite a bit.
Yeah.
So, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I want to thank Sterling for joining me for this and explaining pretty much everything forever.
No, it's my pleasure. You know I love talking about this stuff.
Yeah, and I can't wait to get into the other tanks, and I know we're both excited about like the Manticores, the Hydras, and we're going to do all of these in one video too because they're all on the Chimera chassis.
Yep.
So that video is going to be like 3 hours again, and then we're going to do, the Baneblade, wherever it is, and then we want to tackle the aircrafts. Do you know enough about aircrafts?
Yeah, I was actually raised by an Air Force historian, and most of my service was working with units who were close air support units or stationed on air bases, so I know quite a few pilots.
So, that was Imperial Armor 1, Volume 1, the Imperial Guard and Imperial Navy. And we're going to continue to go over this book, and I'm going to try my hardest to get the other one that goes into the more sci-fi based and bug based enemies and see how we would deal with them in a real world setting.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd want to fight a Hierophant.
Yeah, thing's terrifying. Those are really thin. So, with that all said, I want to know your comments in the comment section down below. You probably have like a million of them. Sterling is a military expert, one of my close friends and co-worker here at Games U. We're not in Mesa, where are we?
We're in Gilbert. Mesa's on the other side of the street.
Yep. We're in Gilbert, Arizona. You guys can come in and visit. Check this place out. As always, I'm NornQueenAlexis. I love you guys. Bye.